2 days after giving birth.
And the diplomatic push from world leaders to prevent an all-out war in the Middle East. We'll hear from the former Defence Minister, Tobias Ellwood.
It's Wednesday, August the 14th. Your headlines. The family of an Essex mum tells Sky News how she begged hospital staff not to let her die.
She told them she was dying. She said to them so many times, "I'm dying, help me. Please help me."
An Israeli strike in Gaza kills newborn twins while their father was collecting their birth certificates. A major incident declared in the West Midlands and a canal being tested for cyanide after a spillage of toxic chemicals. And Olympic hero Rose Harvey reveals she ran the marathon in Paris with a broken leg and yet still finished in under 3 hours. Good morning. You can see Paul Kelso, our business correspondent, has joined us around the set because he has the latest inflation figures that have just crossed. Paul, what are they?
Inflation in July went up 2.2% is the CPI inflation figure. That's up 0.2 percentage points. It was 2% in June. That, crucially, is the Bank of England's target. This is the first increase in inflation this year. Should we worry? Well, it's a small amount. A large part of this increase will be down to the statistical management base effects, as they're known, largely about energy prices. A year ago, the price cap for energy came down more than £1,000. This July, it came down about £100. When you compare those numbers, it means that inflation actually went up slightly, but the underlying, we'll look to see what the Office for National Statistics have said, the underlying effects
will be the come in at 3.3.
Yeah, so core inflation, that's the one the Bank of England will be watching as it considers its interest rate decision for September for next month. We'll be watching closely. That's still high. Services inflation is still quite high. Goods inflation, expect will be continuing to fall. So I don't think there'll be any panic about this, but it just goes to show we are, as the Bank of England's been saying for quite a long time, we're not out of the woods in the inflationary cycle.
And just to give some context on the numbers again, on the headline number, so in May and in June it was 2.0%. Of course, the peak 18 months ago was over 11%, so significantly down from that. The expectation for this month, for July's data, was 2.3. So coming in at 2.2 was marginally better than expected. We're still very close to the Bank of England's forecast at 2%. I guess the question from here is, are we now expecting this trend to continue, i.e. a slight pickup such that that one rate cut that we just had may be few and far between, that we're not on a path for many rate cuts because inflation is ticking up again?
Absolutely. We saw interest rates rise like a staircase, up, month by month. They're not going to come down with anything like the same rapidity. Before these numbers, the expectation of a rate cut at the September meeting was 36%. That's what markets were pricing in. So twice as likely that rates would be held. I'm not convinced these figures change that. The bank has said that it expected inflation, having hit the 2% number, to tick up again. The ONS has confirmed what I was saying earlier. The underlying basis for this is what's happened to energy prices. They fell more last year than they did this year, but they are concerned that wage inflation, we saw wages running at 5.4%, if I've got my number from yesterday right. That is still running in real terms a little bit above inflation. And just the baked-in secondary effects, as the economists call them, the things we can't blame on the Ukraine war and energy prices that have come into this around wages, around price increases, will take longer to flush out. So we'll see what happens to the market thinks will happen to the chances of a cut in September. But it still feels likely perhaps one more this year, not a succession of, sadly for mortgage holders.
Darren, it's interesting on the political implications. Of course, one is how many more rate cuts we get throughout the year, and of course a government would like to see a couple more of those. The other sort of stepping back, big picture question is this idea of the worst economic inheritance. I mean, the scale of the public finances, the money the government has available to spend, is pretty dire, and that's a fair point. But inflation at 2.2%, not too bad relative to the 11. And to Paul's point yesterday, actually the unemployment rate fell.
Yeah, was pretty good. And wages were also up as well. And that's why the Conservative Party this morning is saying, well, hold on a second, Labour here. It's not quite as bad as you seem to portray. Politically, does this matter? Frankly, it doesn't. Why do I say this? Well, we're only a month or so into a stonking Labour majority. I'm not entirely sure in 5 years' time anyone's going to remember the inflation rate of August 2024. There will be, you know, the concern that inflation is a little bit stubborn and that, as Paul has been suggesting, they're not out of the woods yet, and that will obviously have an impact potentially on interest rates and how far they fall. But I think fundamentally for the government, this is not really going to have a massive political impact. In fact, we might not even hear from the Chancellor today. I think two things are concerning. First of all, just on the inflation stuff, the fact that, you know, grocery prices rose, you know, according to Cantor for the first time in 17 months yesterday. That has a real tangible impact immediately on consumers, that's the thing. Second of all, look at the other news today. I mean, we have got genuine concern about, you know, a mass escalation in the Middle East, and we've got a massive ratcheting up in Ukraine and Russia. And what has added to inflation and what makes economics very difficult is global instability. And we might be looking at that, and that will be the big concern for the government today.
Just want to add the reaction to the point that we were just saying about what the framing of this might be on the political spectrum. Well, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, said the new government is under no illusion as to the scale of the challenge we've inherited. With many families still struggling with the cost of living, that is why we're taking the tough decision now to fix the foundations of our economy so we can rebuild Britain and make every part of the country better. An unsurprising framing of things, Darren, given what you just said as well. Paul, quick final word?
Yeah, just very quickly, one number in here to watch out for: the commuters, if they still exist in large numbers post-COVID. RPI, retail price inflation, 3.6%. That is the figure typically in July that informs the price of season ticket increases for rail commuters next January. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule, and we'll wait and see. By January, Labour say the new government will have wanted to transform the way the railway network runs, but that's one to perhaps put in your diary. 1:30 this afternoon, US inflation data. In the wider scheme of things, as Darren's just been referring to the broader situation, that inflation data will probably have more impact on the wider global economy than the number today. 2.2% from...
Of course, moved a little bit ahead of the US Federal Reserve and expected now that the Federal Reserve will cut at their next meeting. We shall see. Guys, thanks so much. Much appreciated. We'll be talking to Yael Selfin as well from KPMG about this inflation data at 1:30 the hour. Now, a coroner's report has found that the death of a mother of 5 who died 2 days after childbirth was avoidable and contributed to by neglect. 36-year-old Laura Jane Seaman begged staff at Broomfield Hospital in Essex not to let her die after she suffered from a severe hemorrhage, which went unnoticed for hours. Rachael Venables has been speaking to her family.
She was just an amazing mum. One thing I remember clearly is her always, you know, dancing and singing in the car.
She was just brilliant. You know, she literally danced and sang and cooked. And
really good cook.
And just made life fun.
Mum of 5 Laura Jane Seaman, full of love and joy, who died just days after giving birth to a baby boy.
This is a drawing that a family friend had made for us because sadly we never got to have a family photo, including all 5 children. So we've had this drawn for us, just so we've got something with all of us together. Yeah, it's amazing, really.
Her delivery was straightforward, but within hours, Laura Jane started to bleed internally. But her rapid deterioration wasn't properly recognised or escalated by hospital staff.
And she said, "No, Mum, I'm dying, help me." And she told them she was dying. She said to them so many times, "I'm dying, help me, please help me."
It was hours of her telling them, and they didn't listen.
She died days later, and her young children must now grow up without their mum.
It's been empty without her. And very difficult to watch especially my teenage sisters try and grow up and become adults without that support. I'm grateful they've got me, And then my brothers to be so young and possibly not remember everything that we are grateful that we get to remember.
This week, a coroner found Laura Jane's death at Broomfield Hospital in Essex was avoidable and contributed to by neglect, with basic failings by staff.
It's not the first time we've heard of something like this going wrong, especially in the last couple of years. So the maternity crisis is, it's sort of abhorrent. I think it goes back to just doing the basic thing, taking basic vital observations, inputting them into the correct chart and doing good handovers and, you know, escalating when you need to escalate.
A spokesperson from the Trust extended their sincerest sympathies and condolences to the family of Laura Jane, adding their focus since has been on improving training to prevent this from happening again.
I bet you would want them to learn and know.
Definitely.
This heartbroken family finally have answers to what happened to Laura Jane, and now they pray for change so it never happens again. Rachael Venables, Sky News.
We'll be talking more about that story later on in the show as well. But for now, time for all of the day's other stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. A major incident has been declared in the West Midlands after toxic chemicals spilled in the Canal. Sky's Daniel Henry joins us now on set. Give us some of the details. This sounds quite alarming.
It is. The reason it's alarming is because of the particular compound that's ended up in these canals in Walsall. It's called sodium cyanide and it carries a number of health risks, headaches, nausea, dizziness, changes in heart rate, loss of consciousness, vomiting, and in the most serious cases, people can fall into comas, have breathing problems, and they can die as a result of taking this in. Dead fish have been spotted in the canals in Walsall since this sodium cyanide has been spotted there. The environmental agency are testing for it. The police are there, the fire services are there, Severn Trent Water Services are there trying to get to the bottom of it. I think we can take a look at the map which gives us a picture of whereabouts in Walsall that we're talking about here. This area of the canals, it affects two or three very specific areas, talking about from Rushall Lock, Riders Green, Perry Bar Lock and Walsall Lock Flight. The thing about the West Midlands is that it's an area of canals. There are like more than 500 miles worth of canals up and down the West Midlands. So any kind of incident that impacts the waterways has the potential to spread quickly. Now, Walsall Council is saying that this particular incident will not affect drinking water, but this is what they are saying also in their statement in relation to this. They say that agencies across the West Midlands, Local Resilience Forum, are treating the chemical spillage into a canal in Walsall as a major incident with a multi-agency response. This spillage is from a site in Walsall, is being investigated. As it's gone into the canal in Walsall as a precautionary measure, we are asking the public to avoid an extended area of the canal and towpaths from the Walsall Lock Flight, as I was saying earlier, to the lock flights at Rushall and Riders Green and Perry Bar. They also mentioned that their priority for this is the safety of people, safety of locals, but really their next priority is going to be identifying who is responsible for this and holding them to account as soon as they can. OK,
Daniel, thank you. Daniel, we'll keep across that story for us. If we get any more, we'll bring it to you. To Greece now, where firefighters have worked through the night to contain the remains of a major wildfire in Athens. Improved conditions have helped crews bring the blaze under control, but high temperatures and wind gusts still pose a risk to flare-ups today. Now, the wildfire forced thousands of people from their homes and claimed the life of one woman. An outbreak of Mpox has been declared a public health emergency in Africa by the continent's top health body as a new strain of the virus spreads. Well, so far this year, more than 15,000 cases and 460 deaths have been recorded across 18 African nations. Mpox, previously called monkeypox, could cause flu-like symptoms and lesions across the body. Japan is set to get a new leader after Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced he will step down next month. The decision means the country's PM won't be running for re-election in the Liberal Democratic Party's presidential race, ending his 3-year term as leader. He says he felt the need to step aside to help the party regain public trust after support dropped. 2 polar bears have killed a worker at a remote Arctic radar station in northern Canada. This is a rare attack. Now, the bears killed an employee of a logistics company contracted by the Canadian government. It happened sometime last week. It's the second fatal polar bear attack since 2023, when a woman and her young son were killed in Alaska. Of course, an investigation is underway.
Yeah, thank you. To the Middle East now, and Hamas say they won't take part in ceasefire talks with Israel, scheduled for later this week. President Biden said overnight that achieving an end to the fighting was becoming more and more difficult. Let's get out to our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, joins us now from Jerusalem. So, Ali, was this expected in terms of the talks not to take part?
Well, we think that the talks will still go ahead, but with the United States, Egypt, Qatar and Israel. If Hamas sticks to what it has told us and doesn't attend the talks, we'll see how significant that is. It's hard to know whether they're just tactically playing games, trying to sort of extract as much as they can from it in the hours that lead up to these talks, or whether they are genuinely serious about it. I would make the point that these talks are going to take place in Qatar, where the Hamas leadership is already based. OK, the new Hamas leader, Yahya Sinwar, is in Gaza. But the mediators from Hamas, if they were attending the talks, would be coming from Qatar anyway. So they're not going to be far away from the hotels where these talks are taking place. These talks are indirect anyway. It's not like everybody gets around the table. It is sort of shuttle diplomacy between rooms. So it might not make a difference. It might be that it's a sort of a statement from Hamas to try and reinforce its position ahead of these talks. They are accusing Benjamin Netanyahu of not being serious about them. But I have to say, you know, there's been a lot of expectation and hope on these talks, and it is looking a bit shaky at the moment, but they are probably the best chance that the region has had for peace in some time. There is a very strong feeling that if they were successful in any way, it would give Iran and possibly Hezbollah the off-ramp not to strike Israel, and so much riding on them. All the while, the fighting goes on in Gaza. The IDF have launched a new campaign in the city of Khan Yunis. I think it's about the 3rd or the 4th time they've had a major operation in Gaza's second largest city. We are approaching the 40,000 dead mark of Gazans in the last 10.5 months. And there is still vicious fighting between the two sides. I should warn you, my report has distressing images from the start. Mohammed became a father 4 days ago. He went to hospital in central Gaza to pick up the birth certificates of his newborn twins. Instead, he ended up in the morgue to identify the bodies of his wife and 2 babies. They were killed by an Israeli airstrike whilst he was out.
People from the neighborhood called me and told me that my house I live in was bombed. My wife, my 2 children, and my mother-in-law were gone. My wife gave birth the day before yesterday. I didn't even have the time to celebrate them. She gave birth by cesarean section, and she was still tired and couldn't walk.
The airstrike hit their top-floor apartment. We asked the IDF for a statement, but haven't received one. Inside, the house is still smouldering from the explosion. They use bottles of water to try and put out the fire still burning. Any sign of family life has already been extinguished. Reem will never know her parents. They were killed in another airstrike, leaving the 5-month-old an orphan. Her body is pockmarked with wounds from shrapnel. She is the only survivor from her family.
She's refused any kind of feeding. This is one of the very sad and catastrophic story we have ever seen in this war. A lot of these sad stories nowadays.
For now, Reem is in the arms of her aunt, but the doctors are desperately trying to find a surrogate mother to breastfeed her before she gets any weaker. Hamas might be severely diminished, but they're not defeated, even after 10.5 months of brutal war. Israel believes that the best chance of a favourable ceasefire deal is to keep the military pressure on Gaza. It might be working, but it's coming at a huge cost to generations of Palestinian families. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Jerusalem.
Well, Defence and Security Analyst and former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood joins me now to discuss that report and also the latest situation in the Middle East. Tobias, let's start with that report if we can. Another harrowing incident as a result of this ongoing war. Realistically, are we going to continue to see more of these for many, many months, even years?
I think that is the big question. Nobody is in full control. The old rules of engagement that prevented escalation are continually being broken, beginning, of course, with the Hamas's attack last October that prompted Israel's invasion of Gaza. Hezbollah then joined in by firing thousands of rockets from southern Lebanon. Israel then struck the Iranian embassy in Damascus, targeted because Iran trains Hezbollah soldiers in Syria. Iran then responded by firing dozens of cruise missiles directly at Israel, the first time that has ever happened. And then Hezbollah's rockets killed 12 children in the Golan Heights. That saw Israel retaliate by taking out one of Hezbollah's most senior commanders, as well as Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, who was actually visiting Tehran at the time. There's been no pause in the escalation, and any hope of securing that ceasefire in Gaza has been replaced by the very real threat of a major joint Iranian-Hezbollah attack on Israel, which could easily lead to a wider regional war with huge geopolitical consequences that could spread well beyond the Middle East, not least with the Red Sea and the Straits of Hormuz closing. This is a very, very dangerous time in the Middle East as well. So getting back to that ceasefire is absolutely critical.
In your assessment, do you think it is highly likely that there will be a major retaliatory attack led by Iran on Israel? And will that then be a moment where it's impossible to prevent a broader war breaking out across the entire region?
Yes, I mean, break that down into two questions. The first one, I think, yes, Iran has made it very, very clear they will. Our Prime Minister took the unusual step of phoning the Iranian president in order to say, avoid this. You know, risk of miscalculation was huge. But Iran has dismissed not just his calls, but those from President Biden as well. We then came out with this joint statement, which was very interesting indeed. The United Kingdom, America, France, Germany, and Italy expressing support for Israel in the event of any hostile action. This suggests that we could see a repeat of April, when we saw UK's RAF mobilise to take out part of the salvo of missiles launched by Iran. So America has sent aircraft carriers into the region as well. We've sent extra assets too. Lots of back-channel conversations, I'm sure, are taking place right now. But there is an anticipation that Iran will attack. The second question then is, what will Israel do to respond, to retaliate? And it could just be their own salvo missiles, or they could take the extraordinary step of actually taking over southern Lebanon as they've done in the past. And that's where international statecraft will need to come in, as to how we manage expectations and get back to discussions about that ceasefire, which are critical, I think, for the region to move on.
You talked about the rules of engagement a couple of times. Do you think it's fair for Iran to respond in some kind of fairly major way?
Well, international law has been broken. I think that the norms have been tested on both sides. So whether you say it's fair or not, where does this take this? Curiously, both sides, Iran, Hezbollah on one, Israel on another, have said they don't want things to ratchet out of control. It's in no one's interest for a full-scale war. But as I just emphasized, we keep testing the boundaries of this. The old rules have been broken completely, and therefore nobody knows where this will go. This is very, very dangerous indeed. And placed next to what's going on in Ukraine and other parts of the world as well, it's taken the world into a very, very dark chapter indeed.
On Russia and Ukraine, just a quick question on that. Do you think Ukraine's incursion into Russian territory is a major turning point in this conflict, or in a couple of weeks, couple of months, will it just be a significant detail, but a detail nonetheless?
No, this is big. I mean, Russia, throughout its history, has bought into the concept of supporting a single, powerful, authoritarian leader, respected by the Russian elites and oligarchs, able to protect the motherland. And when they can't do that, they are then replaced. Now, it's too early, clearly, to write off Putin, absolutely. But this is a huge embarrassment for the leader, the first Russian leader to lose territory to a foreign power since the Second World War. But there's also big questions for the West, I think, as well. Goodness me, what more could Ukraine do in protecting its own sovereign territory if we gave them the necessary equipment and the munitions that they require? Now, Britain's got a great track record on this, but other nations have been hesitant. Caveats have been placed on missile systems, as well as how far they can be fired to. Give Ukraine the equipment that it requires, and this whole conflict could go in a very, very different direction. And I stress, if we don't put this fire out here in Ukraine, Putin has much wider intentions for the European security in Eastern Europe, with huge repercussions for Britain's economy as well.
Tobias, on the Tory leadership race, you don't necessarily have to tell me, although it'd be great if you did, who you're leaning towards, but have you made your mind up? Is there a clear candidate that if you had to choose today, you'd be sure you'd be backing, or not?
No, I was concerned about where the debate was going. Sometimes these move into a very undignified space, as we saw with Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. I'm pleased that the bar has been kept high. My humble advice that I would give to the potential leaders is, please think about where we want to be in 4 years' time, rather than throwing out policy for today. Nobody is still listening to us anymore. We've got a lot of rebuilding to do within the party, within the ranks and so on, to rebuild trust with the British people. We need to be planning for what Britain looks like in 4 years' time, economically, digitally, even militarily, and who our allies are, who our foes are, will be very, very different then than they are today. So there's no point in throwing out policy today. Let's work to rebuild, to be a formidable opposition, and then that's the first step to getting back into number 10.
I wonder, Tobias, if you would have said nobody is listening to us, the Conservatives, now, had you still been an MP.
They're not. I absolutely. I mean, I hope I have a reputation of saying things as they are. I would absolutely be saying that, and to some degree, I was saying that actually prior to the election as well. That we'd lost that trust with the British people. You know, Rishi Sunak had moved the nation into an economically stronger position, calmer political waters. But I'm afraid the nation had decided what they were going to do, and we were punished accordingly. Now's the time to rebuild, but it's going to take years and years and years. Let's use that time wisely. Let's keep the bar high. Let's make sure this debate that we have within our leaders, and we've got some very impressive characters there, is done as as a showcase to say what we can actually do, that we have learnt the lessons from the last election.
Tobias, thanks so much. Good to see you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's have a quick look at the weather. The last of the warm air will clear from southeastern areas today, leaving the country in cooler, fresher but more unsettled conditions for the rest of the week. There'll be extensive low cloud, hill fog and sea mist over eastern areas to start the day, along with patchy rain and drizzle. Further north and west, it'll be cool, fresh, and there will be some sunny spells as well, though rain will give way to drizzle through the morning. The cloud over southern and southeastern areas will be slow to clear. That's your weather. Well, Leo and Darren back here to chat about this extraordinary story. British runner Rose Harvey has revealed that she competed in the Olympics women's marathon with a broken leg.
As you do.
As you do when you're running a marathon, as you so often do.
Oh, well, of course.
Here's some imagery of her running that race, and they now think that she broke her left femur, fractured it in the early couple of miles, and felt pain throughout the rest of it. And despite that pain, she was determined to complete the marathon, despite knowing she was obviously not going to win at this point, and still clocked 2 hours 22.
This is insane. On Instagram, she posted this photo saying...
I mean, I think you can see the pain etched on her face, to be fair there.
Darren, we're going to read her quote on Instagram.
Sorry.
So she posted this and she said, a couple of miles in, I quickly realised that wasn't going to happen. The fact that all her training had gone to plan. The next 24 miles were a painful battle, and it turns out I had a stress fracture on my femur, but despite that, most of my race goals having slipped away, there was still a tiny part of my Olympic dream that I could hang on to, and that was finishing the Olympic marathon. So that's her side of the story. She had to finish it despite the pain, and the intense pain too.
Well, of course. I mean, insane. And the other thing reading into this, which I hadn't realised, she only became a professional marathon runner after leaving a hedge fund. She worked in finance during the pandemic.
Wow. Oh, so that's really recent then.
Yeah, so again, like, extraordinary sort of depth of the story. Again, I guess speaks to the fact of how much just competing in the Olympics meant to her. No, but I mean, like, unbelievable commitment to it. And the other thing I read is that it says she should hopefully be fit enough to walk down the aisle for her wedding in 2.5 weeks' time.
Which is the next big challenge for her.
I mean, it's what a story.
Hobble down the aisle or walk, do you reckon?
Well, I wouldn't put it past her to backflip down the aisle, knowing her commitment. But really extraordinary. We're speaking. We've got amazing Olympics guests today. Josie Knight, who won a bronze cycling medal, joining us at 7:45. Sir Hugh Robertson, who's the chair of the British Olympic Association, joining us at 8:15. So we'll definitely ask him about this commitment. And Tom Daley as well later in the show. So stay tuned for all of that. And congrats to Rose Harvey finishing that race, 2 hours 22. Beat my time, no questions asked. Right, still coming on The Breakfast Show, a big day for the economy. As we mentioned at the top of the show, inflation up to 2.2%. We'll discuss the significance of that, and also how Islamic State are using the social media platform TikTok to help their recruitment. We'll be right back.
Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise, and you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, in a moment, we'll have more on this morning's breaking news, that inflation data of 2.2% that crossed half an hour ago. But first, a reminder of all the day's top stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you very much, Wilfred. As Wilfred was saying, inflation... I know, you took all my information there. So, inflation rises for the first time in 2024 to 2.2%. Data released in the last half hour really shows us a slightly smaller increase than expected, with all eyes now on the Bank of England over potential further interest rate cuts. Distressing story, this one. A coroner's report has found that the death of a mother who died after childbirth was avoidable and contributed to by neglect. We'll have the latest on the Middle East as Israeli airstrikes has killed newborn twins while their father was collecting their birth certificates, as Hamas says it won't take part in ceasefire talks with Israel later this week. Canal water in the West Midlands is being tested for cyanide after a spill of toxic chemicals. A major incident has been declared and people are being urged to avoid a long section of the Canal towpath in Walsall.
Yeah, great stuff, thank you. Let's return now to that breaking news that Leah just mentioned. 2.2% was the inflation rate for July. It rose by 0.2% compared to the figure for June. Also, the figure for May had been 2.0% for the prior 2 months. The expectation was to come in a little hotter than that, though, at 2.3%. It's the first time we've seen an inflation increase this year. It had been on a falling trend previously. Well, Yael Selfin is here, Chief Economist at KPMG, to discuss all this. Very good morning to you.
Good morning.
So 2.2% broadly what was expected, and would we also say broadly still a quite low inflation rate?
Yes, absolutely. It is slightly lower than most forecasters expecting, including the Bank of England, but more or less within the range. We were always expecting a little bit of an uptick in inflation in July and potentially further increases coming ahead this year.
And just gauge for us why it's going back up again.
Well, there's a number of reasons. The good news is when it comes to service sector inflation, what the Bank of England was particularly worried about, core inflation, is down. But what we do have is energy prices making that headline inflation slightly jumpier, because we had falls in energy prices last year, and this year they're going up a little bit again. So overall, it's upward pressure again on inflation from energy prices.
Clearly, the Bank of England did decide to cut interest rates once already. How does this data today influence whether they're likely to do another cut, and when?
Well, it is good news because it is slightly better. It shows that especially what they were worried about is less of an issue. So I think it would make it easier for them to cut again. But saying that, we are still expecting inflation to potentially go up further this year. They're still likely to be concerned, and therefore we're not expecting potentially interest rate cuts at every meeting. We may need to wait a little bit before we see the next cut here in the UK.
I mean, the other data we got this week, yesterday, the unemployment data, also makes a cut in the short term unlikely?
Well, it was very mixed data. We had relatively low unemployment figures that may worry them, but the survey is a little bit unreliable at the moment. We don't have a lot of data, so I'm not sure how much weight they would put on that. The good news was on wages. Wage growth was going down quite significantly. So I think overall, I would say the news we've had from yesterday and today are relatively positive on inflation, but they don't mean that the Bank of England would not continue to worry a little bit about the potential uptick.
Compare for us the situation on inflation at the moment compared to the rest of the G7. Obviously, 20 months ago, we had a higher peak when the times were bad, hitting 11% double-digit inflation. What's the picture like now compared to other countries?
Well, we are at a relatively low level of inflation. For example, if you look at the US, and we're expecting the US numbers to come today, but we are likely to see inflation coming up here, whereas in the US, we're likely to see inflation continuing to go down. So it's a slightly different picture in that sense. The main worry is whether that uptick in inflation, we could see inflation reaching up to 3% here, later on this year, would that feed into stronger wage growth, etc., given that the labour market is relatively tight? In the US, the worries at the moment are that potentially that we're heading into a recession and that the economy is cooling too fast, which means that the Fed there is likely to act more quickly and potentially more aggressively than the Bank of England.
The Chief Secretary to the Treasury said earlier today the new government's under no illusion to the scale of the challenge we've inherited. That phrase about a terrible economic inheritance has been echoed a lot since the election. Where do you stand on that? Is that a fair framing of things across all of these metrics, across some of the metrics more than others?
So we had a relatively strong first half of the year, unexpectedly so. We're expecting a moderation in the second half of the year. But overall, I'd say we're relatively to solid ground. We're at this point at the moment where central banks are trying to cool the economy in order to lower inflation without heading into a recession. So far, we've managed to do that. They've managed to pull that. But there's still vulnerabilities ahead for different countries at a different level. Here in the UK, we still need some more momentum on productivity, on long-term growth that we haven't seen so far with very constrained public sector finances.
Yeah, Selfin, thanks so much for joining us. Great to see you as always.
Thank you.
We did just get a response from the shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, on these numbers. He said, today's figures show how important it is that the new Labour government follows the path of the previous Conservative government and focuses on keeping inflation low. In government, we took the difficult decisions to reduce inflation from 11.1% to the Bank of England's target of 2.0%, paving the way for the first interest rate cut in 4 years. However, there's clearly more to be done to keep inflation down. That's the statement from Jeremy Hunt just moments ago. Moving on now, a Sky News investigation has found that Islamic State is turning to social media to turbocharge its recruitment efforts. On TikTok, some accounts are making content with Islamic State supporting music to bypass the platform's content moderators. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has this report.
The posts on TikTok are harmless enough. Pics at the gym, a seaside view at night, horses galloping down the beach. Listen carefully, though. They all have the same soundtrack, less innocent. A type of song called a nasheed, but one in this case that celebrates Islamic State, with the words of a member of Islamic State laid on top.
The thing with TikTok is that if you hit a button down here on the bottom, which shows you all the other videos that have the same audio, and again, some of those are pretty harmless, but some of those have more extreme content, originally put out by Islamic State itself.
They are much more explicit in their support for Islamic State or IS, showing IS fighters, equipment. Others show prisoners digging their graves.
We found thousands of posts across different nasheeds celebrating Islamic State. Now, some of those have been removed, but they keep popping up. And the worry is that this is being spread pretty innocuously, people maybe not even knowing what they're posting. But you hit that audio hashtag button and you're pulled into a world of Islamic State propaganda.
Disseminating Islamic State or any terrorist content online is an offence. As is often the case with extremist material, it's unclear how much of the content we discovered was posted in a genuine effort to radicalise audiences or was instead intended to shock or amuse viewers, and which posts were simply unaware of the IS content.
We've seen Islamic State supporters use nasheeds and remix them in ways that we didn't think was possible. We've seen them on video game footage. We've seen them on baby photos. Like, it is a thing where there is some deliberate use of those groups' nasheeds. And then there are definitely members of the wider online community that just think it sounds cool.
We took our findings to TikTok. A spokesperson told us, "We stand firmly against violent extremism and have banned all of the accounts and content flagged to us. We regularly train our safety teams to detect evolving extremist trends and remove 98% of content found to break rules on promoting terrorism before it is reported to us." This was a post taken directly from Islamic State's official media channels, freely available on TikTok until we flagged it. Deliberate or not, it is apparently easy for the harmless and the harmful to exist side by side. The audio, the common thread that links them. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
Well, still to come here on The Breakfast Show this morning, star shines bright how Team GB's Josie Knight is keeping the Olympic spirit spinning back home. She joins us live next.
I am a soldier.
Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko are the kings of the heavyweight division. You want to see a heavyweight destroyer?
The mayor of Kiev says things could become apocalyptic if Russia continues to strike its energy infrastructure.
It really is an extraordinary story. These are both brothers, Vladimir, the younger brother, and Vitaly, the older brother, became world heavyweight boxing champs. For about 10 years, they had pretty much all the belts between the two of them, but they never fought each other. That was part of the legend. Their mother wouldn't let them fight each other. Vitaly left boxing in 2011 and went into politics and has been for the last 10 years the mayor of Kiev. And of course, that's been a pretty heavy-duty post for the last 2 years. And so we follow him in the present day as he's dealing with all the day-to-day issues of being mayor in a city under constant bombardment. But also we tell the story of his boxing career and how he ended up where he is. To begin with, it was quite hard because he is the kind of, he's sporting superstar. He's used to dealing with the press, batting them away. So although he'd sort of agreed, oh, what, fly-on-the-wall film, you can come anywhere, actually, he was very reserved. But then there was this terrible tragedy that happened one day where a bomb shelter was left locked accidentally, and two people, a woman and a child, were trying to get in, and they died in a bombardment. And this so upset him that there was a total change in his character, actually, and we happened to be there at the time. And from that moment on, he really let us in. Well, I actually think that Vitaly, has not changed that much. He's a man of few words, but incredibly charming, twinkle in his eye, much smarter than people give him credit for. I think that's his main weapon. People tend to think, oh, he's a heavyweight boxer, he's been knocked around the head, he's going to be a bit dumb. But actually, he's incredibly smart. And one of the things in the film that I think people will find fascinating is the friction there is between him and the President Zelensky. And this relationship is not a good relationship. They're competitors. And it is interesting, they both come from these celebrity backgrounds. Somebody said to me, this is the sign of an immature democracy, that Ukraine's an immature democracy because it has celebrities as its politicians. I don't know if that's the case, but I would say that they've both Zelensky and Vitaly Klitschko have done an incredible job of moving from the kind of worlds of entertainment and sport into politics.
Well, the Paris Olympics came to an end over the weekend with Team GB bringing home 65 medals, finishing 7th in the medal table. As expected, many of those medals came in cycling. Well, we're joined now by Josie Knight, who's part of the women's team pursuit, who won bronze in the track cycling. Great to have you with us, Josie. Very good morning to you. Are you still on cloud 9 following your medal?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was just there was such a buzz around Paris and around track cycling because we've had such a successful time, and we got back Monday night. But yeah, it's been a whirlwind. I'm still definitely riding high on happiness from the medal.
Which of those days since were we right not to have you on? Was there a heavy head from a big night of celebration on any of the days since?
Yes. We all went to the closing ceremony on Sunday, was it? And yeah, that was quite a big night.
Hey, Josie, it's Leah here. Great to see you. What's happening in the background? Where are you? Tell us a bit about what you want to talk about today.
So this morning we're at the Manchester Bike Kitchen, which is part of the Changemaker programme, which is a partnership between the National Lottery operator Owen, Team GB, Paralympics GB and UK Sport, which is helping athletes give back to the communities that have helped them. And yeah, I'm super proud to be a part of it. And as you can see, there's a lot going on here this morning.
Great stuff, Josie. Tell us a bit about the reaction. You're back home in Manchester now, but how have members of the public reacted to that brilliant bronze medal?
Yeah, everyone's been, really, really lovely, and everyone you meet is just excited, to see someone that's been at the Olympics, and then if you pull your medal out, they're even more like, oh my goodness. And I think that was what was so special about Paris, was that it was quite close to home, and it's obviously as close to a home games as I'll ever get. And having compared it to Tokyo, which was the previous games that I went to, because of the COVID restrictions, no family members were there, no Team GB and the British support couldn't really get behind us as much. So it was just a completely different experience this time round, and everyone's been fantastic. And I've really felt the support of everyone, and I've absolutely loved it. Yeah, it's just exactly what I dreamed of when I thought of the Olympics when I was a kid.
Talk to us a bit more about what you want to draw attention to with the event today. It relates to the way cycling and mental health can work together.
Yeah, so here at the Manchester Bike Kitchen, they host things like a tea and tinker morning where people can come if they're feeling a bit lonely or anything and have a cup of tea and work on some bikes, and it inspires people to get on their bikes. And I think for me personally, if I'm struggling with anything, there's nothing like getting out on your bike and just, to free your mind, going out for a pedal. And anything, if you have purpose in your life, or something as simple as learning how to change a bike tyre can make a huge difference. And I think that's what these guys here at Manchester Bike Kitchen are doing, which is so fantastic.
It's really interesting to hear you say that. I mean, I totally get it. I do a very minor little bit of cycling occasionally, and I think getting out, doing some exercise, freeing yourself is always really helpful on so many levels. But equally, is there a loneliness to cycling? I mean, you were part of the team pursuit in this particular Olympics, of course, and very successfully, as we've discussed. But a lot of the training, maybe we're moving more into the elite part of cycling now, presumably is quite lonely, or not? Did you find mental health struggles yourself in your training and the build-up?
No, it definitely can be. I think, as you said, I'm part of a team sport, but most of our training is done out on the road, and we come together for track sessions every now and then. But a lot of time is spent, a lot of hours spent out on your own, like sometimes 5-hour rides, and it can be quite lonely. But I think that's the joy of doing a team sport, is then you do come together and you're supported by this huge team, and it feels fantastic.
Well, Josie, congratulations again for your fantastic medal in the Olympics, and also for shining a spotlight as you are on your return home. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Darren's here as well, and Leah as well. We're going to talk a bit about the papers. Do you know what? Before we get to the papers, I was just going to say, gosh, there's been a lot of sport this summer.
A lot of sport.
Epic. And from the Euros straight into the Olympics, and now obviously the football season's already started with the Premier League this week.
Paralympics coming up in a couple of weeks. We had Wimbledon. I mean, it's been an amazing... I mean, the weather's been terrible on the whole, but the sport's been pretty good.
Fantastic. And it is kind of relentless. The only thing I was going to say the other way around is, particularly on the football, the break that the players get. I know they're paid a fortune. I know they get to do a dream job that beyond the wildest hopes of anyone. But it is kind of relentless, the extent of it all.
And I think there's internationals. I don't know anything about football, but I think there are internationals, aren't there, in September?
There are.
England's playing Ireland, I think, so...
And with a new temporary manager as well.
Indeed.
In Lee Carsley. So anyway, what you are the biggest expert on is politics and newspapers. So wait, what have you picked out to focus on?
Well, we're going to talk about the Telegraph, front page of the Telegraph today. It is essentially leading with this idea that students should base the degree on the passion, not the prospects. This idea that you should do what you want to do at university rather than what you think is going to get you a job. And as someone who did weirdly, I did politics at university. So it was kind of a passion that has actually led to a job. So I'd like to think you potentially could do both.
It's interesting that. What did you study, Leah?
Journalism.
Wow, look at that. Look, we've got two people. I did politics and economics and philosophy, and I picked it, well, more because my A-levels were in that area, but I remember when I picked my A-levels, it was because I thought I have to do something new. I don't want to do any of the subjects I'm still doing. So it wasn't at that point out of a clear passion. Again, I sort of feel lucky that I've ended up in areas that it helped.
But that's true for a lot of people. If you do something you're interested in, you'll work harder at it, And in theory, it'll lead you into a job anyway. So do that rather than do something you think is going to...
The bigger question, Darren, is to what extent were your years at university dominated by your subject versus other things?
I wouldn't like to comment on that. I think it's way too early in the morning.
Well, then use your political training to seamlessly transition to the next story and avoid the question.
Well, we're going to stay on politics. We're going to talk about the Daily Mail. It's focusing on Keir Starmer, not being told, if you like, by the Daily Mail to get a grip on work-shy Britain. And this, again, is all this idea that we've seen... the number of people effectively on welfare benefits increased quite substantially, particularly since the pandemic. We know it's costing the government a lot of money. It's also stopping people from necessarily accessing the workspace. It was a big, big problem for the Conservative Party. Figures have got worse over, as I said, the last year, and it'll be a big problem for Labour going forward.
What's really interesting, if you step away from the slight politicisation of this and the Mail angle focusing on the number of people on welfare benefits, coming out again in the unemployment data yesterday is a theme that is very common across all of the Western world, same in the US, is that labour force participation has fallen. And it's true to celebrate the fact that unemployment has remained remarkably low, despite massive issues like the pandemic. But it's not actually the case that employment is super, super high. No. And it's because less people are putting themselves forward. And a lot of them, though, aren't then claiming welfare benefits. It's just checking out following the pandemic and sort of putting their feet up if they can afford to, which is fascinating.
Should we very quickly end on the Mirror,
Please.
which is these amazing pictures that you've been pointing out, Leah, of the meteor shower.
Yeah, this is from North Yorkshire, actually. You could have seen this week from about midnight to 2 a.m. I have to admit, none of us would have been up.
Both Leah and Darren were like, shut up, Wilf, we want to get to the good pictures.
It's amazing, though. Those
it is
pictures
amazing.
are so good.
We're out of time. We're back after this short break with all the day's top stories. Good morning to you. It is 8 o'clock. Coming up on today's show, how basic failures in hospital care led to the death of a mother 2 days after giving birth.
Plus, inflation rises for the first time this year. We'll have all the figures for you.
And we'll be speaking to the head of the British Olympic Association about what has been a fantastic summer of sport.
It's Wednesday, August the 14th. Your headlines. The family of an Essex mum tells Sky News how she begged hospital staff not to let her die.
She told them she was dying. She said to them so many times, "I'm dying, help me. Please help me."
An Israeli strike in Gaza kills newborn twins while their father was collecting their birth certificates. A major incident declared in the West Midlands, and a canal is being tested for cyanide after a spillage of toxic chemicals. An Olympic hero, Rose Harvey, reveals she ran the marathon in Paris with a broken leg and still finished in under 3 hours. A very good morning to you. A coroner's report has found that basic failures in hospital care led to the death of a mother 2 days after giving birth. 36-year-old Laura Jane Seaman begged staff at Broomfield Hospital in Essex not to let her die after she suffered from a severe hemorrhage which went unnoticed for hours. Rachael Venables has been speaking to her family.
She was just an amazing mum. One thing I remember clearly is her always, dancing and singing in the car.
She was just brilliant. You know, she literally danced and sang and cooked. And
really good cook.
And just made life fun.
Mum of 5 Laura Jane Seaman, full of love and joy, who died just days after giving birth to a baby boy.
This is a drawing that a family friend had made for us because sadly we never got to have a family photo, including all 5 children. So we've had this drawing for us, just so we've got something with all of us together. It's amazing, really.
Her delivery was straightforward, but within hours, Laura Jane started to bleed internally. But her rapid deterioration wasn't properly recognised or escalated by hospital staff.
And she said, "No, Mum, I'm dying, help me." And she told them she was dying. She said to them so many times, "I'm dying, help me. Please help me."
It was hours of her telling them, and they didn't listen.
She died days later, and her young children must now grow up without their mum.
It's been empty without her. And very difficult to watch especially my teenage sisters try and grow up and become adults without that support. I'm grateful they've got me. And then my brothers to be so young and possibly not remember everything that we are grateful that we get to remember.
This week, a coroner found Laura Jane's death at Broomfield Hospital in Essex was avoidable and contributed to by neglect, with basic failings by staff.
It's not the first time we've heard of something like this going wrong, especially in the last couple of years. So the maternity crisis is, it's sort of abhorrent. I think it goes back to just doing the basic thing, taking basic vital observations, inputting them into the correct chart and doing good handovers and, escalating when you need to escalate.
A spokesperson from the Trust extended their sincerest sympathies and condolences to the family of Laura Jane, adding their focus since has been on improving training to prevent this from happening again.
I bet she would want them to learn and know.
Definitely.
This heartbroken family finally have answers to what happened to Laura Jane, and now they pray for change so it never happens again. Rachael Venables, Sky News.
Now to the breaking news this morning, the inflation figures that crossed an hour ago. Paul Kelso has joined us to discuss this. Our business correspondent. Paul, break down the numbers for us and the significance.
Yeah, so CPI, consumer price inflation, rose in July year on year, 2.2%, so up from the figure it had been at in the previous 2 months, 2%, which is the Bank of England's target. I think we've got a chart. We can have a look at the trajectory of CPI. There, as you can see, that huge spike at more than 11% in October 22. It's been falling all of 23, but just look at the very right-hand side of the screen there, that little hockey stick at the end there. That is inflation ticking up, which was expected, hasn't gone up quite as much as economists expected, but it nevertheless shows that the Bank of England's caution has been informed by this. The next chart we can show you shows what the two major kind of portions of the economy that make it up. The red line's still inflation there. The yellow line is goods inflation. That's been in negative territory for months and has been helping bring inflation down. But services, and the UK is in large part a services economy, that has been much higher, and that's still running above 5%. But just the trends of both of those, look, the yellow line's ticked up a bit as the services line, the blue line, has fallen down. So those trends in the inflation picture changing. Should be said the biggest contributor to this increase in inflation is a base effect, is statistical. A year ago, energy prices, the energy price cap set by Ofgem fell by more than £1,000. Last July just gone, it only fell by £100. So that has an inflationary effect, even though energy prices have actually come down.
So what does it mean for prospects of further rate hikes? Because, of course, we got the first rate cut last month.
Absolutely, the first rate cut down to 5%. The expectations before these numbers, in how the markets are pricing in what they think the bank will do, was that 2/3 chance of the bank holding its position, 1/3 of cutting. That's changed a little this morning. It's pretty much 50-50, 45% chance of a cut, the City thinks, and 55% chance of a hold. So people still think it'll be held. Perhaps more interesting, scroll forward to the next rate decision is September. The one after that is November and December. Both those November and December cuts, the market thinks 90% chance of a cut in November and nearly 98% chance in December. So the markets think we might not get one in September as the bank tries to be cautious, but they do expect at least 2 more cuts. So we could be at 4.5% by the end of the year. That would be welcome news, obviously, for anyone with a mortgage who's refinancing.
Darren, political implications?
So I think politically, in many ways, there's not going to be massive implications, if I'm perfectly honest about this. You know, inflation is ticking up. That is concern. It's reflected in the statements this morning. It's not going to change the fundamentals, I think. You know, clearly the government's still going to have to make some very difficult decisions in a budget in just over 70 days' time. Let me just bring you what the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, has said this morning. He said the government is under no illusion as the scale of the challenge we've inherited, with many families still struggling with the cost of living crisis, and that is why they'll take the tough decisions on the economy. Jeremy Hunt, who's now the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, saying that today's figures are important, that the new Labour government follows the path of the previous Conservative government and focus on keeping inflation low, talking, I think, in there in part about public sector pay. So I don't think the government will be too concerned about this. It is going to feed into some of those big economic decisions. You know, we've got the energy price cap decision in a week's time. We've got Bank of England in September. We've got the budget, as I say, in just over 70 days' time. I think what will be more concerning is that inflation is a little bit stubborn, but also just the geopolitical situation. I mean, with tensions, possible escalation in the Middle East, and what we're seeing in Ukraine, they have clearly fled into inflation or bled into inflation in the past. And I think they'll be concerned that if things get worse geopolitically, that could have a big impact on the UK economy.
I mean, it is interesting, though, this prospects of rate cuts, the one we already had, and certainly if we have another one, does make a big difference to the amount of headroom, of course, the Chancellor has to spend in the budget, because it informs the cost of borrowing and in turn informs the sort of forecast the OBR gives the government of how much spending space they have. So they'll be hoping for another rate cut. We'll see if they get one before the budget. 70 days, you said?
77, I think. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
I knew you'd have the exact number.
I'm also 77. No, it's in half.
There we go.
I can't think why that occurred to me. The cost of debt interest of the government, which is nearly 90 billion at the moment, that will come down and that will feed into anything that gives Rachael Rees more headroom. She will be welcoming.
Gents, thanks so much. To the Middle East next, and Hamas say they won't take part in ceasefire talks with Israel scheduled for later this week. President Biden said overnight that achieving an end to the fighting was becoming more and more difficult. Let's get to Ali Bunkle, who's live for us, as always, in Jerusalem for us this morning. Alistair, how significant is it that they're not attending?
Well, we'll see how it plays out. It could be a negotiating tactic by Hamas to say that they're not attending in order to try and sort of strengthen their hand ahead of these talks that are due to take place in 24 hours from now. What I would say is that they are never in the same room as the Israeli negotiators. It's shuttle diplomacy between different hotel rooms, the mediators being the Egyptians, the Americans and the Qataris. And so, although they won't be in the same room, and they're threatening not even to be in the same hotel, because the talks are taking place in Doha, they will be in the same city, because that is where Hamas's political leadership is based. So they won't be far away, even if they're not actually at the venue itself. But as I say, this could be a genuine threat not to take part. It could be a case of some sort of strategic politics ahead of those talks. The focus over the last 2 weeks has been on Iran and Hezbollah and the potential for them attacking Israel. But the fighting is still going on in Gaza in a very heavy way. We are approaching 40,000 Palestinians killed in the last 10.5 months. The IDF have launched yet another operation in Gaza's second largest city, Khan Yunis, and the fighting is still very heavy. I should warn you that my report contains distressing images right from the very start.
Mohammed became a father 4 days ago. He went to hospital in central Gaza to pick up the birth certificates of his newborn twins. Instead, he ended up in the morgue to identify the bodies of his wife and 2 babies. They were killed by an Israeli airstrike whilst he was out.
People from the neighborhood called me and told me that my house I live in was bombed. My wife, my 2 children, and my mother-in-law were gone. My wife gave birth the day before yesterday. I didn't even have the time to celebrate them. She gave birth by cesarean section, and she was still tired and couldn't walk.
The airstrike hit their top-floor apartment. We asked the IDF for a statement, but haven't received one. Inside, the house is still smouldering from the explosion. They use bottles of water to try and put out the fires still burning. Any sign of family life has already been extinguished. Reem will never know her parents. They were killed in another airstrike, leaving the 5-month-old an orphan. Her body is pockmarked with wounds from shrapnel. She is the only survivor from her family.
She's refused any kind of feeding. This is one of the very sad and catastrophic story we have ever seen in this war. A lot of these sad stories nowadays.
For now, Reem is in the arms of her aunt, but the doctors are desperately trying to find a surrogate mother to breastfeed her before she gets any weaker. Hamas might be severely diminished, but they're not defeated, even after 10.5 months of brutal war. Israel believes that the best chance of a favourable ceasefire deal is to keep the military pressure on Gaza. It might be working, but it's coming at a huge cost to generations of Palestinian families.
Well, as I said, the tactic and the opinion of the Israeli war cabinet is that pressure on Hamas is the best way to get a deal. But the Israelis are coming under huge pressure themselves from particularly their Western allies, the US, the UK, France, Germany, to now sign a ceasefire deal. It has been reported in the last couple of weeks that Benjamin Netanyahu's senior security officials as well have told him that now is the time to take a deal, that it is the moment to have a ceasefire, and that the Israeli military could handle the situation and ensure that Hamas were not to regroup. We're hearing from both Hamas and from the Israelis that they both want a ceasefire deal. So if you take their word for it, the will seems to be there. But these things are far, far more complicated. We have seen so many rounds of ceasefire talks start and then fail that I don't think, well, I think people are certainly not getting ahead of themselves with what is due to take place tomorrow. But I mean, just one sign of the pressure that is being put on tomorrow's talks. Amos Hochstein, the US envoy for Lebanon, he's in Lebanon at the moment trying to talk to players there. Brett McGurk, their Middle Eastern senior official, is in Cairo and is going to Doha. And Anthony Blinken was supposed to be here, but rather ominously, he has postponed his trip.
Very interesting. Alistair, as always, thanks so much. And we're going to be talking more about the Middle East a little bit later on as well with the former Foreign Secretary, David Owen, at 9:30. For now, Ali, thank you. Time now for all of the day's other stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you so much. Wilfred, we're going to head to Greece now, where firefighters have worked through the night to contain the remains of a major wildfire in Athens. So improved conditions have helped crews bring the blaze under control somewhat, but high temperatures and wind gusts still pose a risk of flare-ups today. The wildfire forced thousands of people from their homes and claimed the life of one woman. An outbreak of Mpox has been declared by a public health emergency in Africa by the continent's top health body as a new strain of the virus spreads. Now, so far this year, more than 15,000 cases and 460 deaths have been recorded. This is across 18 African nations. Now, Mpox, previously called monkeypox, can cause flu-like symptoms and lesions across the body. Japan is set to get a new leader after Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced he will step down next month. Now, the decision means the country's PM won't be running for re-election in the Liberal Democratic Party's presidential race. This is ending 3 years as leader in charge, and he said he felt he needed to step aside to help the party regain public trust after support dropped. Well, 2 polar bears have killed a worker in a remote Arctic radar station. This is in northern Canada. It is an incredibly rare attack, but the bears killed an employee of a logistics company contracted by the Canadian government. We know this happened sometime last week. Well, it's the second fatal polar bear attack since 2023, when a woman and her young son were killed in Alaska. An investigation into the incident is currently underway. And a shipwreck off the coast of Dorset has been granted protection more than 200 years after it sank. Now, the ship sank in 1805 and it killed more than 200 people on board. The captain of the ship was the brother of poet William Wordsworth. The new status means divers are banned from taking any artefacts or items from the historical wreck.
We're going to be talking about that to William Dalrymple at 9:45 as well. It was a former East India Company ship as well, so there's some controversy attached to it. Looking forward to discussing that at 9:45. Now, Team GB's athletes get back to some form of normality on home soil. The Olympic spirit is far from dwindling as Britain celebrates their superstar talents. Joining us to discuss all of this, the Britain's Olympic Association chairman, Sir Hugh Robertson. Sir Hugh, very good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
No, my pleasure. Good morning.
How do you rate Team GB's performance at this Olympics out of 10 for us?
I think probably a 9. I mean, it's fantastic that the success of recent games has been maintained. To win 65 medals, which is one more than Tokyo, was a fantastic achievement. I think the context that you have to set it against is that this is getting harder and harder to do at each Olympics. Other nations are investing heavily, catching up with us. We've got a new group of athletes. So, as I say, it gets trickier every time. And against that background, I think this was a fantastic performance.
What about rating out of 10 for the Paris Olympics as a whole?
Oh, 10, a straight 10. We went with I mean, to be honest, we sort of weren't quite expecting it, though we should have done because we've interacted with the organising committee extensively over the last decade or so. I think these are the Olympics that brought the world back together again. We've had the last 2 have been beset with problems of one sort or another. Rio was really difficult in a number of ways. Tokyo suffered from coronavirus. Paris was the games that brought everybody back together, and the French very cleverly used iconic landmarks in their beautiful city to show France off to its very best. The French were friendly, welcoming, it all worked beautifully. I mean, I used the metro on a number of occasions because it was better and easier than Olympic transport. A really fantastic games, and they deserve enormous credit.
So Hugh, it's Leah here. Very good morning to you. We are all having withdrawal symptoms from the Olympics. I wonder what support goes into the athletes who have been in that Olympic bubble for so long. What support goes into making sure they're supported in the weeks that follow?
Well, there's quite a long tail off after an Olympics. I mean, if you've got it right, there's the equivalent of a long Indian summer. So this week, they're all out in the communities doing bits and pieces. There's a formal sort of send-off parade at the weekend. Then we all encourage them to go off and have a decent break with family and friends. We also manage all this quite carefully during games time. So one of the reasons that the British Olympic Association pays for and lays on a thing called Team GB House, which possibly a number of your viewers will have visited during the games, is to provide a sort of friends and family experience. So for the athletes, as soon as they come out of competition, they can go to Team GB House, celebrate their successes, be with their families. So it's less of a cliff edge than perhaps your question implied.
So, Hugh, what did you make of the closing ceremony in Paris? Of course, nods to LA with Tom Cruise abseiling, but did you enjoy it?
Yes, I did. I was lucky enough to go. I enjoyed it hugely. I thought the first part, the way they produced the Olympic rings and then pulled them onto elevated them through the Stade de France was fantastic. I think the LA section was an indication of what we're going to get in LA. It's going to be a very different sort of games. LA doesn't have the iconic backdrops of Paris. It'll be much more commercial, be much more cutting edge, be much more Hollywood. They're already talking of having to have sort of special tribunes for celebrities, so they've got somewhere for them to sit and they don't disrupt the running of the game. So I think it's going to have a very different look and feel to Paris, but that's no bad thing. All Olympic Games are different. They have characteristics of their own, and these two are going to be very different.
When, maybe this is a ridiculous question, but you obviously were involved in the process for 2012. When might we host it again, or is that off the cards for an incredibly long time? Will it be a competition to get it back, a fierce competition to get it back? Talk us through the process there.
I think both of those two things are absolutely right, and it's a very good question. We know that 2028 is in Los Angeles and 2032 is in Brisbane in Australia. There's an almighty competition brewing for 2036. I think places like Doha, Delhi, are amongst those that are looking at it. So I don't think it'll come back to Europe before 2040 at the earliest. When it does, there are a raft of capital cities looking at it. Istanbul is very keen to bid. Budapest is very keen to bid. Madrid is a sort of serial bidder. Rome always tries. I mean, Rome would be fantastic, but the problem is it's incredibly difficult to do very much about the infrastructure in Rome because of all the ancient antiquities as soon as you sort of dig down. So I think 2040 is the earliest realistic opportunity. And I think when it does come back to Europe, the competition will be very tough.
Well, you listed pretty much every major city there, so it sounds like I'll lower my hopes on us hosting it again anytime soon. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is the medal table. Do you agree that it's ultimately decided by golds, not total medals? Is there often debate about that, or is it set in stone, set in gold, as it were, that it's always that way?
I'm afraid it is set in stone, and there's nothing worse than the UK in particular whinging about it when we've come out the wrong side of it. I mean, I think it would be fairer if you had sort of a point system, 3 for a gold, 2 for a silver, and 1 for a bronze. And I think I'm right in saying we would have come third under that formulation. But the way the official Olympics table is always done is just by golds. The Americans do it in terms of total medals won, which would also have had us third. But we all know what the rules are. It's like every other sport. It's pointless moaning about it when you come out on the wrong side of it.
I think it should be 10 points, 3 points, 1 point. What do you think about that?
That wouldn't have helped us very much in the nicest possible way.
Forgetting looking backwards, I mean, golds are... It's not the same kind of scale. Anyway, we could talk about this for a long time.
Yeah, could you just do me a favour and come up with a formulation that really helps us? It would be great.
Yeah, exactly. Just finally as well, Sir Hugh, we wanted to ask you about this incredible story with Rose Harvey. I'm sure you've seen the marathon runner who completed in 2 hours 50, I think it was, with a broken femur. I mean, what extraordinary commitment from one of your team, from one of the British athletes.
Yes, I mean, the great thing about the Olympics is that it's full of these, it's a collective. We take 327 athletes. We try and treat them all the same as members of Team GB. But inside that 327 are a series of utterly remarkable stories. And they're very often of ordinary people that you can bump into in the supermarket on a Saturday, who then get selected for Team GB, go off and do something utterly extraordinary, win a medal or just don't, as in this case, and then you find them in the supermarket again the following Saturday. And that, of course, is part of the charm of all of this. So, yes, it is an utterly remarkable story of endeavour, of sheer courage. And as somebody who spent my first 10 years of my working life in the army, I take my hat off to them. It's absolutely remarkable. I love that sort of courage and grit that we see in so many of our Olympians, but it's not unique.
So, Hugh, thanks so much for joining us, and get it back for us. 2040, I think you promised.
I'll do my best.
Lovely stuff. So, Hugh Robertson there.
Yes, that is a promise made here on Sky News. I just wanted to read out Rose Harvey's Instagram post very quickly. She popped up a picture and she was saying, despite how tired she felt, a couple of miles in, I think it's about 2 miles, I quickly realised that it wasn't going to happen, that Olympic dream that she'd worked so hard for. And the next 24 miles were, well, a painful battle. It turns out I had a stress fracture on my femur. Despite that, most of my race goals having slipped away, there was still a tiny part of my Olympic dream that I could hang on to, and that was finished.
That compliment there.
I think maybe,
that compliment there.
I think maybe.
Yeah, I don't get many from that,
and she's getting married. Not Leah, but Rachael.
In 2 weeks.
Which is, wow. Cobbling down the aisle.
I have a feeling she'll make it down the aisle.
I think she will.
Knowing this commitment that she's personified in finishing a race with broken leg. Remarkable stuff.
Can I give you one little Olympic fact?
Yes,
that
please.
actually I learned from Rob Harris the other day in Paris, is that Britain, Team GB, is the only country in the world that has won a gold medal at every single Olympics since the modern Olympics in 1896,
Oh,
I think.
wow.
Only country in the world. So that's quite impressive.
So why is 1896 when we start the phrase modern Olympics?
Because I think that's when the Olympics were kind of revived again after the Greek Olympics.
Interesting.
Many years ago.
Well, there we go. If that's not the definitive answer, you sold it very well. Dan, great stuff. We'll be back after a very short break, and we've got another epic Olympics guest to come. Tom Daley will be with us shortly. We'll also be discussing how Islamic State are using social media, TikTok in particular, to help with their recruitment. And we'll have more on the avoidable death of a mother 2 days after childbirth and what it tells us about the NHS.
Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise. And you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. Well, in a moment, we'll be talking about how basic failures in care contributed to the death of a mother 2 days after she gave birth. That story to come. But first, a reminder of all of the day's top headlines.
Thank you, Wilfred. A coroner's report has found that the death of a mother who died, as Wilfred said, after childbirth was avoidable. 36-year-old Laura Jane Seaman begged staff at Broomfield Hospital in Essex not to let her die after she suffered from a severe hemorrhage, which went unnoticed for hours. Inflation rises for the first time in 2024 to 2.2%. New data this morning shows a slightly smaller increase than expected, with all eyes now on the Bank of England over potential further interest rate cuts. An Israeli airstrike has killed newborn twins while their father was collecting their birth certificates, as Hamas says it won't be part of ceasefire talks with Israel later this week. Canal water in the West Midlands is being tested for sodium cyanide after a spillage of toxic chemicals. People are being urged to avoid the area and a large section of the canal towpath in Walsall.
Let's get more on that lead story that Leah mentioned, the death of a mother 2 days after giving birth. We're joined now by Rachael McGrath, the chair of the Birth Trauma Association. Rachael, thanks so much for joining us. Talk us through what your reaction was when you first read or read the coverage of the coroner's report here.
Thank you so much. It's absolute horror, and all of us at the Birth Trauma Association send our most sincere condolences to Laura Jane's family. It's incomprehensible that this is happening in a system that we had the parliamentary inquiry report just this year, which stated, the title of which was Listen to Mums. And that so clearly didn't happen in this case, with tragic and devastating results.
We know how stretched the NHS is. Is this a instance of a terrible, tragic error that is in any way linked to those factors, or is it just a terrible, tragic error, one that must be addressed and reflected upon, but was such a wild card that it's not so linked to the stresses and strains more broadly in the NHS?
Tragically, we are very lucky that we don't hear of many maternal deaths, but tragically, we do hear of babies losing their lives, and we hear of this time and time again, and it is representative of a system that is broken. At the moment, the Royal College of Midwives identified that midwives are putting in 100,000 unpaid hours a week. Now, at what stage did the NHS become entirely reliant on goodwill? You can't tell me of a charity in the entire world that functions on skilled labour being donated in that depth. And we're looking at a workforce that don't feel able to do their role effectively, and they're not safe, and that is perpetuating a cycle that is not safe for the service users. It must change. And not only that, we're not placing equal parity on mental health as well as physical. And we are seeing thousands of people each year coming through to the Birth Trauma Association with their psychological and physical health completely destroyed by the act of giving birth. Now, we're not saying that giving birth isn't beautiful, and in many cases it is. We're not trying to scare these people, but what we are trying to say is the system needs to change, and it needs to change as a matter of urgency.
Rachael, it's really important that any mums or new mums watching, those pregnant, know that this is incredibly rare. But what change do you feel needs to be in place to give mums-to-be confidence when they are heading in to give birth?
I mean, they need to be clear about their rights in childbirth. They have a voice. So often they are made to feel like their wishes are not important. They are just somebody who is a passenger in their own treatment. Their voice does matter. And if Laura Jane's had been heard, the outcome would have been very different. And it is literally about hearing, listening to mums. Now, what we need to do is empower these women and let them know that their choice can be facilitated. It isn't just a case of you're going in and you're having this done to you. You're not a birthing vessel. We need to empower people to advocate for themselves. And, you know, I desperately feel for a workforce who are working in circumstances that are not conducive to a healthy working culture. But at the same time, it isn't just a funding issue. Kindness and compassion costs nothing. It's not a training issue. It sadly needs to be rolled out desperately. But we need to basically put care and humanity back at the top of the tree for midwifery, for maternity services, and start seeing people as the individuals they are, and start seeing the staff as the skilled practitioners they are, valuing and training and retaining them.
What must have been really difficult for the family is that it could have been preventable, and no doubt you believe lots of trauma that we see across the country is preventable.
It's devastating, and that was another overriding feature of the Parliamentary Inquiry report. Trauma is preventable. All we need to do is, A, listen. Many women describe coming out of their childbirth, I think it's 1 in 3, that find some aspect of their birth traumatic. And that's simply because perhaps their pain wasn't taken seriously. They were frightened. This is something that can be fixed with simple skills. Active listening could fix this trauma. And tragically, that wasn't the case in Laura Jane's circumstance. And, you know, we're looking at more and more desperately serious outcomes like this that are ruining lives. And without actually putting into practice all of these changes, we're going to see a great big cycle of this event happening more and more, because at the moment the NHS is investing incomprehensible amounts of money in compensating those impacted by birth trauma and also fixing them. Maternal mental health units, thank goodness, are being rolled out nationally, and they specialise in trauma and loss. But why are we investing so heavily in fixing those who are traumatised? Why not invest in not traumatising them in the first place?
Rachael, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, Sky News investigation has found the Islamic State is turning to social media to turbocharge its recruitment efforts. On TikTok, some accounts are making content with Islamic State supporting music in order to bypass the platform's content moderators. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire has this report.
The posts on TikTok are harmless enough. Pics at the gym, a seaside view at night, horses galloping down the beach. Listen carefully, though. They all have the same soundtrack, less innocent. A type of song called a nasheed, but one in this case that celebrates Islamic State, with the words of a member of Islamic State laid on top.
The thing with TikTok is that if you hit a button down here on the bottom, which shows you all the other videos that have the same audio, and again, some of those are pretty harmless, but some of those have more extreme content, originally put out by Islamic State itself.
They are much more explicit in their support for Islamic State or IS, showing IS fighters, equipment. Others show prisoners digging their graves.
We found thousands of posts across different nasheeds celebrating Islamic State. Now, some of those have been removed, but they keep popping up. And the worry is that this is being spread pretty innocuously, people maybe not even knowing what they're posting. But you hit that audio hashtag button and you're pulled into a world of Islamic State propaganda.
Disseminating Islamic State or any terrorist content online is an offence. As is often the case with extremist material, it's unclear how much of the content we discovered was posted in a genuine effort to radicalise audiences or was instead intended to shock or amuse viewers, and which posts were simply unaware of the IS content.
We've seen Islamic State supporters use nasheeds and remix them in ways that we didn't think was possible. We've seen them on video game footage. We've seen them on baby photos. Like, it is a thing where there is some deliberate use of those groups' nasheeds, and then there are definitely members of the wider online community that just think it sounds cool.
We took our findings to TikTok. A spokesperson told us, "We stand firmly against violent extremism and have banned all of the accounts and content flagged to us. We regularly train our safety teams to detect evolving extremist trends and remove 98% of content found to break rules on promoting terrorism before it is reported to us." This was a post taken directly from Islamic State's official media channels, freely available on TikTok until we flagged it. Deliberate or not, it is apparently easy for the harmless and the harmful to exist side by side. The audio, the common thread that links them. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
Well, Daniel joins us on set now because we're going to talk about a major incident that's been declared in the West Midlands after toxic chemicals spilled into the canal. This is extraordinary. What are the details, Daniel?
Details are that it's something called sodium cyanide that's gone into the canals at Walsall. Big problem because it can cause things like headaches, nausea, dizziness, vomiting, and in the most serious cases, comas, and people can die if they ingest this particular compound, which is in the Walsall canals. We can actually take a look at a map of roughly where we're talking about here. We're talking of an area between Walsall, Lockflight, Rachael, Riders Green and Perry Bar. The thing about the Midlands, it's an area where there's like loads of canals. You're talking about 500 miles worth of canals in that area, so anything that happens in the waterways is a big problem. We've heard from the Environment Agency, the police, the fire services, Severn Trent Water. They're all on site trying to get to the bottom of this. There's a little line from the council leader saying that their priority is the safety of residents and they're urging people to avoid the area. But really, the main priority is going to be identifying who is responsible for this spillage and holding them to account as soon as they possibly can.
Absolutely.
Daniel, great stuff. Thanks so much. Still to come here on The Breakfast Show. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll be joined by Team GB poster boy Tom Daley after he announces his retirement.
I am a soldier.
Vladimir and Vitaly Klitschko are the kings of the heavyweight division.
You want to see a heavyweight destroyer?
The mayor of Kiev says things could become apocalyptic if Russia continues to strike its energy infrastructure.
It really is an extraordinary story. These are both brothers, Vladimir, the younger brother, and Vitaly, the older brother, became world heavyweight boxing champs. For about 10 years, they had pretty much all the belts between the two of them, but they never fought each other. That was part of the legend. Their mother wouldn't let them fight each other. Vitaly left boxing in 2011 and went into politics and has been for the last 10 years the mayor of Kiev. And of course, that's been a pretty heavy-duty post for the last 2 years. And so we follow him in the present day as he's dealing with all the day-to-day issues of being mayor in a city under constant bombardment. But also we tell the story of his boxing career and how he ended up where he is. To begin with, it was quite hard because he is the kind of, he's sporting superstar. He's used to dealing with the press, batting them away. So although he'd sort of agreed, oh, what, fly-on-the-wall film, you can come anywhere, actually, he was very reserved. But then there was this terrible tragedy that happened one day where a bomb shelter was left locked accidentally, and two people, a woman and a child, were trying to get in, and they died in a bombardment. And this so upset him that there was a total change in his character, actually, and we happened to be there at the time. And from that moment on, he really let us in. Well, I actually think that Vitaly, has not changed that much. He's a man of few words, but incredibly charming, twinkle in his eye, much smarter than people give him credit for. I think that's his main weapon. People tend to think, oh, he's a heavyweight boxer, he's been knocked around the head, he's going to be a bit dumb. But actually, he's incredibly smart. And one of the things in the film that I think people will find fascinating is the friction there is between him and the President Zelensky. And this relationship is not a good relationship. They're competitors. And it is interesting, they both come from these celebrity backgrounds. Somebody said to me, this is the sign of an immature democracy, that Ukraine's an immature democracy because it has celebrities as its politicians. I don't know if that's the case, but I would say that they've both Zelensky and Vitaly Klitschko have done an incredible job of moving from the kind of worlds of entertainment and sport into politics.
Well, the Paris Olympics are over. We're going to have another epic conversation with guests coming up with Tom Daley. And, of course, Darren, the reason we just got you back on set ahead of Tom Daley is Leah, when we were talking about marathon running, obviously highlighted that she's run a marathon in the past. So you're obviously an expert diver.
Oh, of course, yeah. Yeah, I'm always to be fun. I mean, I live in Stratford, so I live essentially in the Olympics, if you like. And, you know, the aquatic centre, it's going to call it the swimming centre, the swimming pool, is still there. It's still there.
It's brilliant, though, how the Olympic Park is still in use. You know, I grew up in Tower Hamlets, covered the London Olympics, and actually was a little bit sceptical ahead of that about the investment and the legacy, but it's fantastic, isn't it? Yeah. Local schools will have swimming lessons in the aquatic centre, and that's what it's all about. It's not just the gold medals, it's about how you invest in the future.
And also the messages that can be put across by these athletes who gain such fame and status from their success. And we're able to bring one of them in now. Of course, the legend that is Tom Daley. He's joining us now alongside Matt Croxall from the Royal Life-Saving Society. A very good morning to you both. And Matt, forgive me if I go to Tom first of all. Tom, are you still beaming cloud nine from the success at the Olympics?
I mean, the Olympics was so much fun. It was amazing to be able to go and have another little bonus round at the Olympics, if you like, to come away with a silver medal and be able to compete in front of my family. It was so special. So, yeah, I'm feeling very grateful and proud, for sure.
And I was just sort of mentioning loosely as we came into this that you and some of your fellow athletes, when you get home, so nobly want to shine a light on causes that are important to you. So tell us why you're there and alongside Matt today.
Yeah, I'm alongside Matt from the Royal Life-Saving Society, and we're on Brighton Beach currently because my knitwear brand Made with Love has teamed up with Malibu to try and spread some awareness around alcohol and water, and trying to spread awareness of the fact that 1 in 4 drownings involve alcohol, and 80% of people in the UK have no idea about that. So there's a collection to raise money, and all the profits are going to be going to the Royal Life-Saving Society. So it's an important message to be safe around water, especially after consuming alcohol.
And Matt, how quickly does alcohol start to elevate those statistics of tragedies or incidents taking place? Is it as simple as a sip of beer, or is it something? Are there cut-off bits of advice that you suggest in terms of it's okay to have 1 drink or 2, or to paddle then not have a long swim? Talk us through the advice you give to people.
Yeah, well, there's a number of different contributing factors to how much alcohol will affect any individual, I suppose. I guess our advice is, you know, as the Royal Life-Saving Society, we're all about enjoy water safely. So we're never going to put people off getting out there and enjoying that open water in particular, but swimming in any way. But it's to do it in that safe manner. And yes, alcohol can be a contributing factor to those accidents taking place because it can impede somebody's judgment, all that kind of thing. So it's just a matter of being aware of the effects that might have on you, and to absolutely swim in those lifeguarded and supervised areas.
Tom, it's Leah here. Hello, so great to see you. We have to go back to the Olympics, I'm afraid. What I loved about watching you was your family that were there in the crowds, Dustin and the kids. How important was it having that support around you during such a high-pressure time?
I mean, having family support around me, I mean, it's the most important thing. And I think, you know, when it comes to athletes, the people behind the athletes, the other halves, the parents, the friends, the family around you are the ones that actually carry the Olympians and the athletes to those games, because without their support and without their constant, you know, when it comes to going away for training camps, when it goes away to competitions, the sacrifices that they have to make are second to none. So, you know, without your friends and family around you, and especially my husband and my kids, like, none of the Olympics this time around would have been possible. I mean, the whole reason I went back in the first place is because Robbie said that he wanted to see me dive at the Olympics. So, yeah, he was quite sad yesterday when, you know, I told him that, well, the day before yesterday when he found out that I wasn't going to be diving anymore, bless him.
So have you had time, Tom, to really reflect on retirement? Because I remember speaking to you, you won't remember, and it's fine. I remember speaking to you at London 2012 and talking about how each Olympics it's very different for you. How do you feel now, sort of walking away from the sports and forging a new future, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, like you say, each Olympics was very different for me. In 2008 at 14, I had no idea what I was doing and what was happening. And then London 2012, there was such a high-pressure environment, competing in front of a home crowd. And then 2016, like I knew I was going to be in the best physical and mental condition, but I wanted it so badly, I kind of tortured myself through the whole experience. And then by Tokyo, I was, already a parent, and I had a different perspective on what diving meant to me, and I realised I was more than a diver, and I was actually able to then start to enjoy it and have the perspective of, like, no matter what happens, good or bad, I can come away from the competition knowing that my friends and family are going to love me regardless. And then that was what that extra lap around the Olympic sun, if you like, was in Paris recently, because I got to go back and really enjoy it and really embrace the moment.
Matt, how much of a boost does it give to an organisation like yours to have someone like Tom using their platform, following, so recently returning with the spotlight on them to get your message across?
I mean, we're so grateful for Tom being involved in this. You're right, it raises huge amounts of awareness for an organisation like ours. Ultimately, we are in this business to try and save lives, and so to have somebody that raises our profile alongside Malibu in this case is just fantastic. And yeah, we can't thank Tom enough.
Tom, I'm interested, drinking responsibly, of course, is critical more so than ever when it's in and around water. Over the nuts that you're retiring after 5 Olympics at just the age of 30. You mentioned there how long you've been doing this from such an early age. Have you been able to have moments of enjoyment over that period of time, or has it been so focused on the relentless level of commitment you have to put in to win medals at Olympics that actually, for the first time in your life now after you retire, you might actually be able to get that balance right for the first time?
I think that's something that I've gotten a lot better with as I've gotten older, is the balance between training and having a life and being able to enjoy things with my friends and family. And I think, especially because after Tokyo, I thought myself I'd retired then, really. And I took 2 years away from the sport, and then coming back, I had a lot more of a balance, and I was able to have just train once a day, 5 days a week. So my training schedule has looked very different because I prioritized my family and my friends and being able to feel like I could live a little and have a life. And I think that was something that was really important. And and I think that also reiterates the message around, I live in California now, so around water a lot, and I think this message is really, really important, and I'm, very proud to be part of it. And, it's what the whole message behind it is, to don't drink and dive. So there's a lot more info on don'tdrinkanddive.com as well to be able to get all of the facts.
Yeah, brilliant campaign to you both. Tom, before you go, do tell us, what do the kids make of your Olympic medals?
Oh, Robbie was so excited coming into the Olympics. He has a little journal that they've been working on all year, and probably every other week he will at least write in it about how long the Olympics were away, what he was going to be doing, how much he wanted to see the Eiffel Tower. And the one big piece of pressure that I had coming into these Olympic Games was to come back with a medal, because on the medals it has a little piece of the original Eiffel Tower, and he wanted to be able to bring that into school to show his teacher, Miss Barbara. So I was like, okay, this is great. So yeah, I managed to secure that. So he's very happy that we're taking a bit of Eiffel Tower home with us.
Tom, I read somewhere that up next you're going to be launching a swimwear company. Is that right?
Well, there's all kinds of things. Actually, part of this collection has a swimwear on it. So I actually have some crocheted trunks, and I've got, bucket hats, sunglasses, sliders. There's all kinds of things, and and it's all of the profits of that collection go to the Royal Life Saving Society. So that's why we're here.
Well, Tom, Matt, thank you both very much indeed. We really appreciate it, and congrats again on just the most epic of careers, Tom Daley. And Matt Croxall there. And
thank you.
Darren loves a pair of Speedos.
Well, I don't know where that came from. I was going to say, actually, I don't think he should retire, because he's really
I've got
involved
this
in
image
knitting.
of you in
No, I've just created that. My apologies.
knitting, I think, should be made an Olympic sport, and Tom Daley shouldn't retire because he's now ticking up. He's a big knitter, isn't he?
Knitter.
He's a big knitter.
Yeah, I was going to say, if he does launch a swimwear line, he should bring in some different types, or it might not sell that well.
I won't be a model, that's all. Everyone needs to
please
be
do.
On that note, we're out of time. We'll see you for all the top stories in a couple of minutes. A very good morning to you. It's 9 o'clock coming up on today's show. How basic failures in hospital care led to the death of a mother 2 days after giving birth.
Plus, the diplomatic push to avoid an all-out war in the Middle East will be joined by the former Foreign Secretary, Lord David Owen.
And we'll be speaking to and playing against a 15-year-old that's just become Britain's youngest chess grandmaster. I'm pretty sure I know who will be winning out of us.
But there's a debate at least for who loses
quickest?
Last.
Ah.
That is how optimistic we are here on Sky News about that challenge, but we look forward to it at 9:20. But first, all of the day's top headlines. The family of an Essex mum tells Sky News how she begged hospital staff not to let her die.
She told them she was dying. She said to them so many times, "I'm dying, help me, please help me."
The government says tough decisions are needed to fix the foundations of the economy as inflation rises to 2.2%. An Israeli strike in Gaza kills newborn twins while their father was collecting their birth certificates. New figures show violent crime against women and girls on trains has jumped by more than 50% in 2 years. And Olympic hero Rose Harvey reveals she ran the marathon in Paris with a broken leg and still finished in under 3 hours. Very good morning to you. A coroner's report has found that basic failures in hospital care led to the death of a mother 2 days after giving birth. 36-year-old Laura Jane Seaman begged staff at Bromfield Hospital in Essex not to let her die after she suffered from a hemorrhage which went unnoticed for hours. Rachael Venables has been speaking to her family.
She was just an amazing mum. One thing I remember clearly is her always, dancing and singing in the car.
She was just brilliant. You know, she literally danced and sang and cooked. And
really good cook.
And just made life fun.
Mum of 5 Laura Jane Seaman, full of love and joy, who died just days after giving birth to a baby boy.
This is a drawing that a family friend had made for us because sadly we never got to have a family photo, including all 5 children. So we've had this drawn for us, just so we've got something with all of us together. It's amazing, really.
Her delivery was straightforward, but within hours, Laura Jane started to bleed internally. But her rapid deterioration wasn't properly recognised or escalated by hospital staff.
And she said, "No, Mum, I'm dying, help me." And she told them she was dying. She said to them so many times, "I'm dying, help me. Please help me."
It was hours of her telling them, and they didn't listen.
She died days later, and her young children must now grow up without their mum.
It's been empty without her. And very difficult to watch especially my teenage sisters try and grow up and become adults without that support. I'm grateful they've got me. And then my brothers to be so young and possibly not remember everything that we are grateful that we get to remember.
This week, a coroner found Laura Jane's death at Broomfield Hospital in Essex was avoidable and contributed to by neglect, with basic failings by staff.
It's not the first time we've heard of something like this going wrong, especially in the last couple of years. So the maternity crisis is, it's sort of abhorrent. I think it goes back to just doing the basic thing, taking basic vital observations, inputting them into the correct chart and doing good handovers and, escalating when you need to escalate.
A spokesperson from the Trust extended their sincerest sympathies and condolences to the family of Laura Jane, adding their focus since has been on improving training to prevent this from happening again.
I bet she would want them to learn and know.
Definitely. This heartbroken family finally have answers to what happened to Laura Jane, and now they pray for change so it never happens again. Rachael Venables, Sky News.
Now to the other top story of the morning, the breaking news at 7 a.m. The latest inflation figures. Paul Kelso's here to break those down with the significance on the economic side, and Darren back for the political side. Paul, first, remind us the numbers.
The headline rate of CPI, consumer price inflation, rose to 2.2%. Had been for a couple of months at 2%. That's the Bank of England's target rate for inflation, but it's ticked up. We'll show you a chart that spells out. We've had this huge hike in interest rates. Maybe we won't see the chart. Up to 11.7%, people. There it is. Looks like an alpine stage. The inflation rate, forgive me, the alpine stage in the Tour de France, doesn't it? That huge spike in October 22. Falling all of this year. Now look at the hockey stick at the very right-hand side of that red line. It's just ticked up a little. Now, people shouldn't be too concerned about that. That's largely the impact of the base effect. Energy prices, the energy price cap fell by more than £1,000 a year ago. Last month, it fell by £100. So even though the prices came down, inflation went up slightly. The underlying goods and services inflation we can show as well. These are the underlying factors that help bring us to that red line still there is inflation. The blue line is Services inflation, that's the majority of the British economy. That's been stubbornly high above 5%. It's just starting to come down. That'll give the Bank of England some heart, while goods inflation has been in negative territory. That now beginning to come up. The bank also it doesn't like negative inflation as much as it dislikes high inflation. All of this raises the question, what will the Bank of England do at its next meeting in September to interest rates? We've just had the first cut since the hiking cycle began. Market expectations on the back of these numbers are it's about 50-50 for a hold or a cut next month. But look further ahead, the following meetings in November and December, the markets are clear. 9 out of 10, 90% chance, almost 100% chance of a cut in December. So a couple more cuts this year. Of course, it's still up to the bank. They've been cautious. They forecast inflation would rise. They haven't. Once they started moving, they only want to go in one direction. We've seen what's happened in America, where the Fed increased interest rates and they helped cause a market spasm. We'll get US inflation numbers later today. They probably will have more impact on the global picture than the British numbers.
Yeah, US held rates, didn't they? So it didn't cut, which worried some market participants. Darren, talk us through what this means politically.
Well, I think in many ways it's not particularly seismic. It's not going to change the dial, if we're perfectly honest about this. I mean, there has been political reactions this morning. It's notable that actually from the government it's come from Darren Jones, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, and not from the Chancellor herself, who I think it's fair to say may not be, maybe on holiday. But let's see what Darren Jones has had to say. He says that the new government is under no illusion as to the scale of the challenge we've inherited, with many families still struggling with the cost of living. That's why they're taking the tough decisions to fix the foundations of the economy. The Conservatives have been quite angry, actually, about some of the economic data in the last couple of days, in the sense that actually it's portrayed the economy not necessarily being in a terrible state. And even though inflation's ticked up, it has only ticked up. Jeremy Hunt, the Shadow Chancellor, saying that today's figures are important in the sense that they show that Labour is effectively, or should follow the path of the previous Conservative government with a focus on inflation and keeping it low. So I think, as I say, fundamentally not going to change the political situation, but it is a reminder, I think, of some of the big different economic figures that are going to bleed into, and the stats we're going to find out from the energy price cap to interest rates to GDP out tomorrow, all going to bleed into the budget, which we're expecting in October, and big, big decisions for Rachael Reeves to be made. And there's also the concerns about what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening with Ukraine and Russia, and how that geopolitical politics could all play into potentially weighing down a little more on the British economy.
The budget, if you didn't know, is in 77 days.
Is it?
Yeah.
Is it? I didn't know that.
So one to mark down on your calendar. Final word on the inflation numbers, Paul?
Yeah, I think actually this feels like a more normal round of inflation numbers. We pay a great deal of attention to economic data because it's been so volatile for 3 years. This feels like the return, perhaps, of a more normal cycle. And when it comes to the politics, it's the public finances that clearly are what are going to get the attention in the budget, and where the concern is. The economic picture was turning. That's what the Tories' phrase was, and the tide has turned. Labour may be the beneficiaries of this slightly improving picture, so the public finances need a great deal of work.
Gents, thanks so much for now. To the Middle East next, and Hamas say they won't take part in ceasefire talks with Israel, scheduled for later this week. President Biden said overnight that achieving an end to the fighting was becoming more and more difficult. Let's bring in our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, who joins us live from Jerusalem. Ali, how significant is it, the way in which these talks are or aren't being attended by all sides?
Well, I think we will have to be honest, wait and see how significant it is. The reason I say that is that Hamas have told us, as you say, that they do not plan to attend these talks. What we don't know yet whether that is their absolute firm position or whether or not it's a tactic that they're playing. 24 hours out, maybe they're trying to harden their position, if you like, in order to extract the best terms from a deal. So we'll see which of those it is. What I would say is that these talks are taking place in Doha in Qatar. Israel and Hamas do not sit around the same table in the same room anyway. That's why you've got the mediators, the Egyptians, the Qataris and the Americans going backwards and forwards in some kind of form of shuttle diplomacy. So they're not in the same room. If Hamas don't go to the same hotel or venue where these talks are taking place, okay, but they will be in the same city. The Hamas political leadership is based in Doha. So even if they do stick firm to their threat, as told us, then they will still be pretty close by. There's a lot riding on these talks. The fighting is ongoing in Gaza. It is still very vicious. Hamas and the IDF are fighting one another, and civilians are losing their lives. I should warn you that my report contains distressing images from the outset. Mohammed became a father 4 days ago. He went to hospital in central Gaza to pick up the birth certificates of his newborn twins. Instead, he ended up in the morgue to identify the bodies of his wife and 2 babies. They were killed by an Israeli airstrike whilst he was out.
People from the neighborhood called me and told me that my house I live in was bombed. My wife, my 2 children, and my mother-in-law were gone. My wife gave birth the day before yesterday. I didn't even have the time to celebrate them. She gave birth by cesarean section, and she was still tired and couldn't walk.
The airstrike hit their top-floor apartment. We asked the IDF for a statement, but haven't received one. Inside, the house is still smouldering from the explosion. They use bottles of water to try and put out the fires still burning. Any sign of family life has already been extinguished. Reem will never know her parents. They were killed in another airstrike, leaving the 5-month-old an orphan. Her body is pockmarked with wounds from shrapnel. She is the only survivor from her family.
She's refused any kind of feeding. This is one of the very sad and catastrophic story we have ever seen in this war. A lot of these sad stories nowadays.
For now, Reem is in the arms of her aunt, but the doctors are desperately trying to find a surrogate mother to breastfeed her before she gets any weaker. Hamas might be severely diminished, but they're not defeated, even after 10.5 months of brutal war. Israel believes that the best chance of a favourable ceasefire deal is to keep the military pressure on Gaza. It might be working, but it's coming at a huge cost to generations of Palestinian families. Another sort of development overnight that maybe is a bit concerning for the prospect of the ceasefire talks is that the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has postponed his trip to the region. He was supposed to be coming to Israel, Qatar and Egypt, but he has postponed that to what date we don't know, and we're not entirely sure why. There was some suggestion it could be security concerns, but at the same time we're hearing that there's no imminent intelligence to suggest an attack from Iran or Hezbollah is going to happen in the next day or so. So, look, on the face of it, that doesn't bode well. Having said that, let's look at glass half full. The US do have 2 major players already in the region. Amos Hochstein, their envoy for Lebanon, is in Beirut, and Brett McGurk, their Middle Eastern, the sort of head of the Middle Eastern department, is in Cairo and then going to Doha. So Washington, in particular, is putting a lot of pressure on both sides to come to a deal, and of course, a ceasefire is riding on it. The release of some or all of the hostages is riding on it, but also we are sort of getting hints that if a ceasefire was to be agreed, or at least some decent progression in that direction, then it might be enough to convince certainly Iran, possibly Hezbollah, not to attack Israel.
Ali Bunkle, as always, thanks so much. And we'll be talking about all of this with the former Foreign Secretary David Owen in a few moments' time, about 1:30 the hour. Time now for the top stories.
Thank you, Wilfred. To Greece now, where firefighters have worked through the night to contain the remains of a major wildfire in Athens. Improved conditions have helped crews bring the blaze under control, but high temperatures and wind gusts still pose a bit of a risk of flare-ups today. The wildfire forced thousands of people from their homes and claimed the life of one woman. An outbreak of Mpox has been declared a public health emergency in Africa by the continent's top health body as a new strain of the virus spreads. So far this year, more than 15,000 cases and 460 deaths have been recorded across 18 African nations. Now, mpox, previously called monkeypox, can cause flu-like symptoms and lesions across the body. Japan is set to get a new leader after Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced he will step down as early as next month. Now, the decision means the PM won't be running for re-election in the Liberal Democratic Party's presidential race, ending his 3-year term as leader. He says he felt he needed to step aside to help the party regain public trust after support dropped. A major incident has been declared following a toxic chemical spillage in a canal in the West Midlands. Now, the canal in Warsaw is being tested for sodium cyanide after the Environment Agency was notified of the spillage. The public being urged to avoid the area, with the council warning of a potential serious health risk to anyone who has direct physical contact with the water. 2 polar bears have killed a worker at a remote Arctic radar station. This is in northern Canada. It's quite a rare attack, but the bears killed an employee of a logistics company contracted by the Canadian government last week. It's the second fatal polar bear attack since 2023, when a woman and her young son were killed in Alaska. There is an investigation underway. Should we take a look at the weather? Let's see what it's looking like out there. Well, the last of the warm air will clear from southeastern areas today, leaving the country in cooler, fresher and more unsettled conditions for the rest of the week. And there will be extensive low cloud, hill fog and sea mist over eastern areas to start the day, along with patchy rain and drizzle. Further north and west, it will be cool, fresh morning with sunny spells too. The afternoon rain will give way to drizzle through the morning. So, as Wilfred likes to say, Avengers have assembled.
Yes.
In the form of Darren McCaffrey here.
It's always my favourite time when we all come together.
I think so. We have a bit of a natter. Listen, we've had quite a few Olympic heroes on the show so far, and we've been talking about Rose Harvey too, which, incredible. So she finished that women's marathon on Sunday, and she was suffering from quite the injury, wasn't she? A fracture to her femur.
2 miles in, they think she fractured her femur, and she powered on regardless. What I think's so amazing about this is obviously she knew from pretty early on she wasn't going to win any medals. She didn't know she'd broken her femur and fractured it. She just knew she was in pain. And that just speaks even more to the commitment that you are purely finishing the race to be a finisher. As opposed to thinking, oh, I've still got a chance of glory or whatever else. And I just think, what an amazing commitment.
You look at that face and you can see the pain etched on her face. I mean, it looks... I mean, this was from, I think, the second mile, she said, she started to feel
really
the pain.
early on.
If you were doing a marathon, there'd be no pain on your face.
Very,
You'd be
very
gliding through with ease. We do actually
break a sweat.
have a soundbite from Hugh Robertson, the head of the British Olympic Association, if I've got that right, the chair of it, who joined us earlier, about her.
The great thing about the Olympics is that it's full of these, it's a collective. We take 327 athletes. We try and treat them all the same as members of Team GB. But inside that 327 are a series of utterly remarkable stories. And they're very often of ordinary people that you can bump into in the supermarket on a Saturday, who then get selected for Team GB, go off and do something utterly extraordinary, win a medal or just don't, as in this case, and then you find them in the supermarket again the following Saturday. And that, of course, is part of the charm of all of this. So, yes, it is an utterly remarkable story of endeavour, of sheer courage. And as somebody who spent my first 10 years of my working life in the army, I take my hat off to them. It's absolutely remarkable. I love that sort of courage and grit that we see in so many of our Olympians, but it's not unique.
Rose Harvey, amazing, amazing story. So Hugh Robertson reflecting on that. Now, you can see there's a chessboard here on set. There's going to be 2 more brought out during the break because we will be playing, all 3 of us, simultaneously.
I think playing might be a stretch.
Against,
Losing.
the youngest ever British chess grandmaster, 15-year-old, will be joining us. Do we even have a chance, is the question.
No, I don't know how to play. Any tips, please tweet me during the
I think he's just planting that as a seed.
I think so.
So getting your excuses out early, Darren. We're playing chess with Shreyas Royal, the youngest ever British grandmaster, in a moment. How long can we last before we each lose? That's the question. We'll see you shortly.
Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise, and you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
Welcome back. Well, a 15-year-old boy has become, I'm 25, excuse me, the youngest British chess grandmaster, we're delighted to say. Shreyas Royal joins us now. He's brought a chessboard with him. We teased before we went to break. First and foremost, welcome, Shreyas. Great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
That all three of us were going to play. During the morning, Darren and Leo were saying they're not very good at chess. They don't even know how the pieces move. So we scrapped the idea of all three of us.
It's very clear.
Yeah,
I don't even know what this is.
Maybe there was a miscommunication. Anyway, so now it falls upon me to play Shreyas on my own, and they've even put a clock in the background. So I've got to last 5 minutes. This is.
Good luck.
I mean, the chances are zero. I think the key thing will be I will move my pieces.
We're definitely on Team Will.
Very, very slowly.
As long as you don't stall it out.
Yeah, no, so, well, I might stall it out. But the question, as we start, we're going to play whilst we interview, is...
white moves first, by the way.
Oh, you get to go first?
I mean, you can have the white pieces if you'd like.
Oh, I see. Is that a thing? Gosh, I don't know the details as well.
Yeah.
OK, well then...
I mean, we can...
Guess first, Shreyas, grandmasters first. So we'll keep chatting whilst we're playing, but is there even a chance that I can win this? I mean, my point on that is, if we talk about other football and the like, a professional player can miss a penalty and they can have a bad day at work and all of that. Is that something that could happen here, or are the chances... Oh gosh, it's not going well.
I mean, the chances are quite slim.
Less than 30 seconds.
Why? They're quite slim.
I feel like if chess grandmaster were to play a beginner or even amateur player, I mean, it's very likely that, the amateur would probably lose 100 times in 100 games.
Really?
Yes.
There we go.
There's a 0% chance.
0% chance here. Let's... while I know how the pieces move, just about, I have not played in a long time. There we go. I'm getting my excuses out.
Only 4 minutes to go.
So the next question I was going to have, in terms of the skill set you needed to get to this point, is that, again, unique to an individual like yourself, or can people train themselves to be very good at chess? Do you have to have a mathematical mind? Guys, you've got to weigh in with some questions after this. I'm trying to focus.
No, I think... by the way, this is already checkmate. But
Go on. It's already over. There you go.
I mean, I was being quite cheeky here. I went for a fairly dirty trap, but...
I mean, you did last 1 minute and 20 seconds, and you were working at the same time.
Yeah,
I was quite impressed.
Through those questions.
Jesus.
So look, this is the time.
I thought I'd get more than 3 moves.
Well,
that is pathetic.
I was, being a bit cheeky here because I was kind of gambling with this trap. But
So you set that trap from before we even started? Basically.
Well, I didn't know how good you were, but then, of course, with the chat we had before, it felt like I could probably get away with this.
This is amazing.
Do you know where it all fell apart? Was that I let you go first. That's too polite.
Yeah, you see, that's the trap.
Because I was going to do a different trap, and then everything was thrown off. Well, OK, well that was pretty humiliating.
Well, can I ask when do you first start playing this? It's
what age?
Yeah, you're only 15, so you must have started very, very, very young.
Yeah, I started playing when I was 6. My father taught me the game, and then I went to my local school chess club, and I just got better.
And what does it mean to be a grandmaster, and what does it mean to you personally?
I think grandmaster is quite a huge achievement. It's quite a rare thing to achieve. I think there's even a statistic that there are more billionaires in the world than chess grandmasters.
Wow.
So technically, there's about 800 million people who play chess. So technically, it could be said that being a chess grandmaster is harder than becoming a billionaire.
Shreyash, who do you look up to in the chess world that you think, wow, you're amazing? Or do you just look in the mirror and get your answer?
It's a bit of both. I think confidence is required, but I certainly look up to some of the past, some of the world champions from the past, especially Magnus Carlsen, who actually just so happened to sign this chessboard.
Oh.
I saw, and that's the chessboard you used to play with me because you knew I was of similar quality. But you played with Rishi Sunak, is that right?
Well, I didn't exactly play him. I don't think he knows too much about how the pieces move, but he did seem fairly keen about chess. Yeah. And this is why, actually, the government did announce some funding for chess last year.
So Darren and Leah, same campus as the former Prime Minister. Very, very quick final question. AI and tech, is that going to make computers better than grandmasters or not?
Computers are already better than grandmasters.
They already are?
There's this thing called chess engines. And these things are very strong, incredibly strong. I think since from 1997, ever since it beat the former world champion Garry Kasparov.
You couldn't beat them with that great move you pulled on me?
No, definitely not. I think chess computers are better than world chess champions even. So.
Will you come back and join us when you hit the next milestone? World champion, I guess, would be the next milestone.
Certainly, and next time I come, I'll beat you even quicker.
I'm sure. Well, I'm going to practice.
I'm not entirely sure that could be possible.
Practice. I'm going to practice, and I'm going to take my moves even slower, so you can't beat me quicker.
Yeah, maybe you'll be smarter and stall it. Maybe we should have a clock next time, chess clock, and see how quickly I can beat you.
Yeah, I'm sure. Listen, this is not something I'm even going to try and push back on. You schooled me with great simple ease, and it's all very embarrassing. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Britain's youngest grandmaster, Shreyash Roll, joining us there. You guys putting me on the spotlight and not joining in the humiliation.
You did very well. I thought you did very well.
We'll be right back after this short break and talking about the very latest in the Middle East with former Foreign Secretary David Owen. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. In a moment, we'll be speaking to the former Foreign Secretary, Lord Owen, to get the latest on the Middle East and Russia and Ukraine as well. But first, reminder of all the day's top stories. Leah's got those for us.
Thank you, Wilfred. Inflation rises for the first time in 2024 to 2.2%. New data this morning shows a slightly smaller increase than expected, with all eyes now on the Bank of England over potential further interest rate cuts. A coroner's report has found that the death of a mother who died after childbirth was avoidable and contributed to by neglect. And an Israeli airstrike has killed newborn twins while their father was collecting their birth certificates, as Hamas says it won't take part in ceasefire talks with Israel later this week.
Yeah, thank you. Well, let's get more on the situation in the Middle East at the moment. Delighted to say that joining us now is the former Foreign Secretary, David Owen. Lord Owen, very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Do you think it's inevitable that in the coming days even, or weeks, that Iran will retaliate in a big way?
Not inevitable, but very high risk. I think the government have handled it well. We have relations with Iran. We have an embassy there. And we have been utilising that. But before the Prime Minister spoke to the Iranians, he had a channel with all the 4 or 5 other countries. So we're using our strength of not acting by ourselves, but utilising our own capacity because of having an embassy and having relations. And as far as possible, we should go on keeping our relations with Iran.
If Iran retaliates in a significant way, what is the risk from there of a full-scale war? Is that the moment that everything changes?
Well, I personally think that Israel would be extremely wise to hesitate and not go. Normal Israeli response is immediate. On this particular occasion, with what's happening in Gaza, and I think the fact that some Israeli policies have caused more than raising of eyebrows amongst their real friends and allies, they should be very careful about responding.
Is it fair to say, if we look back at the instance of the last year and a bit, that when Iran last responded in a big way, it gave Israel a moment to regain a bit of the PR internationally in that? Is that what you're getting at with this, or something else?
Well, what's dangerous about this is that both sides have indicated to the other that their nuclear weapons are this time not off the agenda, that they have taken action which indicates that the next attack could be on each other's nuclear weapons. That is very dangerous. Therefore, this crisis is, I think, in a funny way, more dangerous than some of the obvious fights that we've had before between Iran and Israel.
In terms of some kind of peace agreement, whether it's temporary ceasefire with specifics around Gaza or broader around the region, you've been involved in these talks across the Middle East. They're insanely complicated. Do you look at it now and think we're further away from any type of agreement than at any point in the last couple of decades, or not?
I think Gaza has changed everything. I think there was a great deal of goodwill for Israel throughout the world, and in many Arab countries, Muslim countries. Israel has lost a lot of that, not often publicly expressed, but privately well-regarded respect. And they've got to be very careful now. They have made some errors in their policy, and they need to watch very carefully. And the normal Israeli response, immediate retaliation, needs to be just put not on the shelf, but put in reserve.
Interesting.
It's very difficult, and I don't believe in telling other countries how to run their affairs, or particularly at times of war. But so far, I think the diplomacy of the Western powers, the United States, Biden is still president, consulting, and in this particular case, using the new Prime Minister in Britain rather cleverly to speak for the others, a new voice.
Not to do a sort of history lesson here, but I'm interested, because we're talking so much about Iran today, You were Foreign Secretary during the Iranian Revolution. We always talk, particularly in the US, about Iran being, the malign actor in all of this. Can we draw a direct line back to that moment in time, or is that exaggerating and overplaying the extent to which Iran is the cause?
I think we should be careful about blaming Iran solely, and I don't think we should harbour resentment because of past disagreements. I'm a strong believer in Iran and the Iranian people. I think it's a great country, and I think we have to treat it at all times with the respect that then usually gets a good response from Iran. We made our mistakes in the past, Mossadegh, a democratically elected leader, we removed many years ago, but we did so, and it was a mistake, and we should be open about it. And we have sometimes used the oil weapon too ruthlessly for our advantage and not sometimes taking enough account of the overall needs of the Iranian economy. But there is a good deal of respect for Iran still around the world in most of the major countries. We shouldn't dissipate it.
Switching focus, we're running out of time, but Russia and Ukraine, the incursion by Ukraine into Russian territory, how much of a game changer is that to this conflict?
It could be a big game changer, but it is certainly one indication that the president of Ukraine is taking his own decisions, and he is no longer feels, and I think rightly, tied down in how he responds to Russia. I think this is potentially a game changer, and I think we have to watch it very carefully, but we are not running Ukrainians' foreign policy or its defense policy. We are helping them with arms. That is all we do. We are not a decision maker, and we must let them make decisions which might be uncomfortable for us. We are not there, and Russia knows that. We are not making the decisions. And this is a very clear manifestation. The president of the country is intent on making his own decisions, and rightly so.
Will Ukraine be hoping that Kamala Harris wins and Israel hoping that Donald Trump wins?
I doubt Ukraine is into that. They'll take up whoever comes. I know Trump has made some strange statements about what he will do immediately. Trump actually, in government, was a lot more cautious than people think. I don't believe the American election is a dramatic changer. There's an underlying... Trump showed a respect for the military, not many other people, but he did respect the military, and I think that would continue if he was to become president again.
David, it's always a pleasure to catch up. Thanks so much for stopping by. Good to see you.
Pleasure.
Lord Owen, the former Foreign Secretary. Now, Sky News' investigation has found that the Islamic State is turning to social media to turbocharge its recruitment efforts. On TikTok, some accounts are making content with Islamic State supporting music in order to bypass the platform's content moderators. Our data and forensics correspondent, Tom Cheshire, has this report.
The posts on TikTok are harmless enough. Pics at the gym, a seaside view at night, horses galloping down the beach. Listen carefully, though. They all have the same soundtrack, less innocent. A type of song called a nasheed, but one in this case that celebrates Islamic State, with the words of a member of Islamic State laid on top.
The thing with TikTok is that if you hit a button down here on the bottom, which shows you all the other videos that have the same audio, and again, some of those are pretty harmless, but some of those have more extreme content, originally put out by Islamic State itself.
They are much more explicit in their support for Islamic State or IS, showing IS fighters, equipment. Others show prisoners digging their graves.
We found thousands of posts across different nasheeds celebrating Islamic State. Now, some of those have been removed, but they keep popping up. And the worry is that this is being spread pretty innocuously, people maybe not even knowing what they're posting. But you hit that audio hashtag button and you're pulled into a world of Islamic State propaganda.
Disseminating Islamic State or any terrorist content online is an offence. As is often the case with extremist material, it's unclear how much of the content we discovered was posted in a genuine effort to radicalise audiences or was instead intended to shock or amuse viewers, and which posts were simply unaware of the IS content.
We've seen
Islamic State supporters use nasheeds and remix them in ways that we didn't think was possible. We've seen them on video game footage. We've seen them on baby photos. Like, it is a thing where there is some deliberate use of those groups' nasheeds, and then there are definitely members of the wider online community that just think it sounds cool.
We took our findings to TikTok. A spokesperson told us, "We stand firmly against violent extremism and have banned all of the accounts and content flagged to us. We regularly train our safety teams to detect evolving extremist trends and remove 98% of content found to break rules on promoting terrorism before it is reported to us." This was a post taken directly from Islamic State's official media channels, freely available on TikTok until we flagged it. Deliberate or not, it is apparently easy for the harmless and the harmful to exist side by side. The audio, the common thread that links them. Tom Cheshire, Sky News.
New figures show violent crimes against women and girls on trains have jumped by more than 50% in 2 years. Let's bring in Sadia Chowdhury, who's in the newsroom for us this morning with this story. Sadia, break down what sounds like some shocking statistics.
Yeah, it's really grim reading this morning, looking at these figures which come from British Transport Police. They're looking at their data over a number of years, and they've compiled that into the 2024 report. And actually, some of those statistics are quite concerning. So as you say, the numbers of attacks on women that have more than doubled since 2021. And by the way, some of these numbers weren't very low to begin with. So in 2021, the number of sexual harassment reports was 7,561. That's now jumped to 11,357. Sexual offences jumped by 20%. Sexual harassment, as I say, reports doubled. That's catcalling, touching, pressing, upskirting, indecent exposure, all on the rise. Women facing so much of that on trains, on British railways. And crime data, separate crime data, suggests that most of these assaults occur during the evening rush hour and at times when trains are the most busiest and packed. Now, if you think that's an indication that perhaps people are reporting these offences more, I'm not too sure about that, because the British Transport Police data suggests that only 1 in 5 people who have witnessed somebody else on a train being a victim of sexual harassment have reported it to the police. And just over half of women say that somebody else who watched intervened. So there is all of that, I think, for a lot of witnesses and people who are on trains, users of trains who see such things, are also worried about the attack, being attacked themselves and the risk that might bring on themselves. The British Transport Police, who collected this data, say that it is an indication that people are reporting this more. They've listed their app, and they have a text service which people can access when on trains. So if something is happening right before you, you can access those services, and they're calling for the community to watch out for each other, to stand up for one another when it is safe to do so, and to report these offences.
Sadia, thanks so much. Lots more still to come here on The Breakfast Show. How a shipwreck linked to the poet William Wordsworth, sank more than 200 years ago, will now be protected. We'll have that story next.
Do you know what kind of pollen gets up your nose? Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
Well, cooler, fresher conditions will reach all parts of the country by the end of the day, but southeastern areas will be largely cloudy throughout, with outbreaks of rain and drizzle. Northern and western parts will be dry, bright and sunny, although cloud will spread from the Atlantic later in the day. There's very little airborne grass pollen left, nor even weed pollen, but spores will be prevalent in some dry conditions, so counts are likely to be high over northern and western England, but lower over Scotland, Northern Ireland and the cloudy southeast. That's your pollen report.
Sky News Pollen Reports, brought to you by the Kleenex Your Pollen Pal app.
Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
When you cover big, tense protests, there's almost always a moment when the atmosphere changes. There's a different noise, and you start to smell tear gas in the air.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
When we spoke to the fishermen down in Cornwall, all the politics from Westminster was a million miles away. This was about their jobs, their livelihoods.
Emirates Premium Economy. Maybe one day all airlines will have seats like this. Fly Emirates, fly better. Thank you.
Welcome back. The wreck of a ship which sank more than 200 years ago off the coast of Dorset, killing more than 200 people, has been granted protection by the government. The Earl of Abergavenny, a merchant sailing ship, was captained by John Wordsworth, the brother of renowned romantic poet William Wordsworth. Let's bring in historian William Dalrymple now to discuss the significance of this. Very good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Just remind us who owned the ship or operated the ship and the relevance of that to this story.
So it's not a very happy story in that this ship was coming back from China. It was owned by the East India Company, and the business that the East India Company had in China was opium. This was a drug smuggling ship. They grew opium in India. They took it to China, illegally sold it in China in 1805. It was not a legal trade. And with that money that they made for that, they bought tea, which they then sold in India, in Europe, and in America. It's East India Company tea, for example, that gets dumped in Boston Harbor during the Boston Tea Party. So the whole American Revolution is kicked off by this trade. But it's a fascinating bit of history, and it did something more to enrich our country than probably anything else in its entire history. It was the most profitable trade that Britain was ever engaged in, as Pablo Escobar discovered in a similar trade later in Central America.
So does it deserve protected status, and why is it getting that status now?
Well, I mean, if you take it on a moral ground, no. I mean, this is a shocking piece of drug smuggling. The East India Company was the biggest narco operator in history and makes Pablo Escobar look like Andy Pandy or bananas in pajamas. But in terms of the history and its importance to our country, it really couldn't be of more importance. The East India Company was the single biggest employer in early 19th century Britain. It was the biggest source of our wealth, along with slavery. And it's a very important bit of our history that we should know about. I mean, people often have very romanticized views about where Britain's money came from and what elevated us from a middle-ranking European country in the 17th century to the richest country in the world by the time the ship was sailing around. And the answer, I'm ashamed to say, is drugs and slavery. And that's the truth that we have to stomach. And it's important our kids get this education and learn about this slightly unpleasant chapter in our history, rather than getting a lot of sort of patriotic whitewash. I think it's very important that it's preserved, and that the true and slightly dodgy version of this story, that a multinational, the world's first multinational, which conquered a country with a mercenary army. It wasn't the British Army that conquered India. It wasn't Downing Street. It was a corporation, the East India Company. It's a fascinating bit of history. I've been writing for 30 years, and it's one of the most extraordinary stories in history, but it did more to transform our country. I'm speaking to you from Scotland, and Scotland was even more enriched per capita than England. Scotland went from the very bottom of the European wealth league right up to the top, entirely due to East India Company enslaving interests. So it's a fascinating bit of history. I think it's very important it's taught.
Indeed, you've been writing about it in your book. The Anarchy is sort of the book on the East India Company. Just expand for us, for those that don't know, on the point you just mentioned. This was a company, not the nation, that delivered these evils, if you go as far as using that word, and with it great riches. Does that then give a modicum of excuse to the nation as a whole, or was it tacitly approved throughout? Expand on that for us.
I don't think it's a useful way to look at history, to look at it sort of, with moral judgment. History is full of horrors all over the world. It's not a pretty story. But this was a transformative moment in our history. But yes, it was a corporation. It's founded in London the same year that Shakespeare is writing Hamlet. If you'd walked out of the Globe Theatre, taken a right, and gone to Leadenhall Street, which is where this picture is, this engraving is of, the East India Company occupied the same space of London Street and Leadenhall Street for 300 years. And over the course of those 300 years, the building grew from a tiny little thing that looks a bit like a Tudor pub to this thing that looks more like Buckingham Palace on the profits. And from that building, India was conquered. Actually, India was conquered from a much smaller version of that building on the same site, with just 5 windows wide, and just expanded and expanded. And it's a good warning for us today about the power of corporations. There's been a lot in the media in the last week about the power of Elon Musk, for example, how a man with a private corporation can basically call the shots of rioters on British streets and face off a British Prime Minister. This is a very similar situation to the power of the East India Company, which was the Elon Musk or the Google or the Facebook or the Exxon Mobil of its day. It was enormously powerful. It could conquer countries. It had an army twice the size of the British Army. There was 1799, there was 100,000 troops in the British Army. The East India Company could field 200,000 troops in India. All mercenaries, all Indians paid from East India Company profits, led by Indian moneylenders. So, it's morally an enormously complex story. It's fascinating.
It is absolutely fascinating. Sadly, we are out of time on this day's show, but we'd love to get you back and hear more detail. And indeed, those that want more detail can tune into William's fantastic podcast, Empire, as well. William Dalrymple there. Well, we're pretty much out of time here on the show, alas, so we don't have time to mock me for losing quite as quickly as I did in the chess.
At least you could take part, unlike us two.
Exactly.
So.
We're out of time. Sky News Today, next.